Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the surprisingly tranquil life of a medieval monk in 12th century England. What you're about to discover is how brewing ale and tending sheep intertwined with prayer and contemplation in ways you never imagined. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You roll over on your wooden cart, feeling the chill of the stone walls seep into your bones. Welcome to your life as a 12th century monk in England, where the morning bells are your alarm clock, and the drafty monastery is your humble abode. Forget any romantic notions of divine solitude. The reality is more about cold feet and early starts. As the first rays of sunlight struggle through the narrow windows, you find yourself shivering into wakefulness, ready for another day of pious duties and economic pragmatism. Your morning starts not with a cappuccino, but with ale. Yes, ale. Before you raise an eyebrow, remember this. Back in the day, water could be as unsafe as a medieval joust. Fermented drinks like ale were the safer bet, and a nutritious one at that. Think of it as your medieval smoothie, giving you the carbs and calories needed to tackle a day filled with prayer, work, and more prayer. You grab a small loaf of bread to accompany your drink, and the breakfast of champions is complete. Now, about the monastery itself. You might think of it as a spiritual retreat, but it's more like a medieval conglomerate. The economy of your monastery doesn't run on good intentions alone. It's built on agriculture. The land surrounding your sanctuary is a patchwork of fields that produce everything from wheat to barley, the latter being a key ingredient in your beloved breakfast ale. The monastery owns this land, no small feat, considering the average cost of an acre of arable land could be around 1 to 2 pence a year. Your brethren are not just men of prayer, but also savvy agriculturalists, managing these lands to ensure both spiritual and financial sustenance. But don't let the bucolic imagery fool you into thinking life here is simple. The monastery is a hub of political influence, a power player in the chess game that is medieval England. The king might wear the crown, but your abbot holds sway over local lords and even has the ear of the bishop. You're part of an institution that helps shape policies, collects taxes, and occasionally dabbles in diplomacy. Who knew that wearing a robe could be a power move? Yet, amidst all this political maneuvering, there's a common myth that monastic life is about isolation, a serene existence away from worldly woes. Spoiler alert, it's not. The reality is that your monastery is a buzzing center of activity and influence. You host travelers, provide charity, and occasionally get caught in the crossfire of local disputes. Monks like you are often called upon to mediate conflicts, a medieval judge duty, if you will. As the morning progresses, you join your fellow monks for the day's first service. The church echoes with Gregorian chants, a sound both haunting and beautiful. But don't let the melody distract you from the fact that these services are also a showcase of the monastery's wealth and power. The stained glass windows, imported from the continent, are a testament to both faith and financial clout. Such opulence isn't just about spiritual inspiration, it's a statement of prestige. After the service, it's time to roll up your sleeves, literally. Your daily routine involves physical labor, not just spiritual reflection. The monastery relies on your hands to till the fields, craft manuscripts, and maintain the complex. Forget the image of monks as passive devotees. You're the multitaskers of the medieval world. And while it might seem tedious, this work is essential. It's what keeps the monastery running and ensures that your community prospers. As you work, it's hard not to think about the outside world. The monastery may feel isolated, but you're acutely aware of the political and social dynamics beyond its walls. England is a land of shifting power, where kings and nobles vie for dominance. Your monastery's allegiance can tip the balance in such struggles, making you a pawn in a much larger game. Yet there's a certain satisfaction in knowing that your quiet existence holds such potential for influence. By midday, you're ready for another meal. This time it's pottage, a humble stew of vegetables and grains. Meat is a rare treat, reserved for special occasions, so you make do with what the land provides. It's a far cry from a modern lunch menu, but it's filling and fortifying. As you eat, You reflect on the rhythm of monastic life, a blend of contemplation and hard work, punctuated by the occasional intrigue of politics and power. The afternoon brings more labor and prayer, a cycle that defines your existence. While it might seem monotonous to some, you find a certain peace in the predictability. There's a comfort in knowing your role, your duties, and the impact your work has on both the monastery and the wider community. It's a life of modesty and meaning, far removed from the chaos and unpredictability of the world outside. As evening approaches, you gather with your fellow monks for Vespers, the last service of the day. The setting sun casts a golden glow over the chapel, a fitting end to another day in the life of a medieval monk. As the chants rise around you, you're reminded of the dual nature of your existence, part spiritual journey, part economic enterprise. It's a balance that defines your days and shapes your nights, a testament to the enduring complexity of monastic life. And so, as you retire to your simple cell, you carry with you the quiet satisfaction of a day well spent. It's a life that's far from the romanticized vision of pious solitude, yet rich in its own right. As you drift off to sleep, you can't help but wonder what tomorrow will bring in this ever-evolving tapestry of medieval monasticism. As you drift off to sleep, the distant murmur of chants still echoing in your ears, you know tomorrow promises another day in the relentless cycle of monastic life. And before you know it, the morning bell jars you awake, summoning you to the scriptorium, a place where the past and future of knowledge are literally inked onto vellum. Now, if you're picturing a cozy library with monks leisurely copying texts by candlelight, let's hit pause on that idyllic daydream. The reality: you're about to enter the medieval equivalent of a startup, chaotic, demanding, and crucially important. The scriptorium is where you, our medieval knowledge worker, will spend countless hours hunched over manuscripts. Think of it as the Silicon Valley of the 12th century, but instead of coding apps, you're transcribing the wisdom of the ages. And let's talk about those manuscripts for a second. They're not just any old books, they're illuminated manuscripts, the bling of the medieval literary world. Picture pages edged in gold leaf, with vivid illustrations that would make any modern graphic designer weep with envy. But before you get too starry-eyed, remember this: each manuscript was a labor of love and economics. The cost of creating a single illuminated manuscript was astronomical. Vellum, the writing material made from animal skin, was a precious commodity. It took roughly 170 calfskins to produce a single Bible. And let's not forget the gold leaf, meticulously applied by hand. The price tag, equivalent to a small fortune, enough to buy several oxen or a parcel of land. So much for the romantic notion of monks as starving artists. They were more like the original startup founders, managing resources wisely to produce a high-value product. Why go through all this trouble? Well, in an era when the printing press was still centuries away, preserving knowledge was a Herculean task. Books were scarce, literacy was rarer, and education was a luxury. Monasteries like yours were the universities of their day, the repositories of learning. You were the keepers of knowledge, ensuring its survival through turbulent times. Forget the image of the monk as a reclusive scribe. You were a guardian of civilization, tasked with the formidable responsibility of preserving the intellectual heritage of the world. As you sit down at a wooden desk, quill in hand, you understand the weight of this task. Each stroke of the pen is a step in a long marathon, and there's no shortcut to the finish line. The ink you use is made from a mix of soot, gum, and water, a recipe that hasn't changed for centuries. And here's a fun fact: the ink was so prized that some unscrupulous monks would add a bit of gall to make it last longer, a bit of medieval hacking, if you will. The laborious process of copying texts is not just about maintaining the status quo. It's about wielding influence. The books you produce can sway opinions, shape theology, and even affect political power. Remember, in a world where information is power, the monastery is a powerhouse. Producing books isn't just an act of devotion, it's a strategic move on the grand chessboard of medieval society. The manuscripts you create will travel to far-off lands, influencing minds and cultures. But let's not gloss over the challenges. The scriptorium is a demanding environment. Sitting for hours on end, the only sound the scratching of quills isn't exactly a recipe for good posture. Your back aches, your eyes strain in the dim light, and the cold seeps into your bones. The romantic image of the monk as a serene scribe is a myth. Reality bites, and it bites hard. You're not just battling physical discomfort, but also the relentless pressure of deadlines. Yes, even in the 12th century, deadlines were a thing. Some things never change. And then there's the constant battle against the elements. Dampness and fire are the sworn enemies of vellum, and a single mishap can turn months of work into ash or pulp. It's a precarious existence, where the fruits of your labor are always one disaster away from being lost forever. Yet, despite these challenges, there's a certain satisfaction in knowing that your work has a lasting impact. The book you finish today might just be the one that survives through the centuries, a beacon of knowledge in a sea of ignorance. In this era, where preserving knowledge is akin to preserving power, the role of the monk is pivotal. You're not just a scribe, you're an educator, an influencer, and a gatekeeper of culture. The scriptorium is your battlefield, and each manuscript is a victory in the ongoing struggle to keep the flame of knowledge alive. So, while the romanticized notion of artistic devotion is appealing, it's the economic necessity and strategic importance of book production that truly defines your work. As you finish another page, you take a moment to reflect on the broader significance of your labor. In a world where literacy is a privilege, the monastery is an oasis of learning. You're part of an elite group that holds the keys to knowledge, shaping the intellectual landscape of medieval Europe. It's a responsibility that weighs heavily on your shoulders, but it also offers a unique sense of fulfillment. The day draws to a close, and as you rise from your desk, you feel the familiar twinge in your back. It's a reminder of the physical toll of your work, but also a testament to your dedication. As you leave the scriptorium, you know that tomorrow will bring more of the same, the relentless pursuit of knowledge in a world that often seems indifferent to its value. Yet, there's a quiet satisfaction in knowing that you're part of something larger, a centuries-long tradition of preserving and disseminating the wisdom of the ages. With a crack in your spine and a satisfying stretch, you bid the scriptorium farewell and head toward the refectory for the midday meal. Don't expect a banquet fit for a king, though. This is more about function than flair. The term feast is as foreign here as a tick-tock dance in a library. Your meal is as predictable as the sunrise, a bowl of pottage. This hearty stew of grains and vegetables is the rock star of monastic cuisine, and it's got more appearances than the Rolling Stones. Now, before you start imagining a lush medieval buffet, let's break down the reality. The monastic diet is a testament to the resourcefulness and limitations of the time. It's the medieval equivalent of farm-to-table dining, but not because it's trendy. It's because you literally can't afford anything else. The abbey's kitchen relies heavily on what's grown within its own walls. Picture the abbey as a self-sufficient bubble, with the garden as its heart and soul. The monks aren't just spiritual guides. They're also the original locavores. Why so restrictive, you ask? Well, it's partly about piety and partly about practicality. On the spiritual side, abstaining from lavish meals is seen as a form of discipline, a way to keep worldly desires at bay. But let's be honest, piety often takes second place to economics. Meat, for example, is like your secret crush, always on your mind, but rarely within reach. It's expensive, a luxury reserved for Sundays and feast days. So your diet ends up being a balancing act between spiritual purity and economic necessity. Monastic life is like budgeting for a minimalist lifestyle, but with more prayer and fewer Instagram influencers. And speaking of balancing acts, the monastery's garden is a botanical wonderland of medieval practicality. It's where the magic happens, not the Harry Potter kind, but the earthy, herbal kind. These gardens are more than just salad factories. They're pharmacies in disguise. That sage and rosemary aren't just for seasoning. Oh no, these herbs are the medieval equivalent of over-the-counter medication. Got a headache? Try some willow bark. Feeling queasy? Peppermint might do the trick. It's like having your very own CVS, minus the fluorescent lighting and long lines. Here's where things get really interesting. The economic implications of these gardens are a lesson in medieval healthcare. With trade limitations making exotic spices and imported medicines as rare as a dragon sighting, your garden becomes a lifeline. Herbs like chamomile and lavender are grown not just for their soothing properties, but also as a hedge against the volatile market of imported goods. It's a bit like investing in Bitcoin, only much more reliable and significantly less stressful. Now, while the romantic image of monks as peaceful gardeners might appeal to some, the reality is a bit more, shall we say, down to earth. The garden is a place of hard labor and even harder choices. You're not just growing plants, you're cultivating survival. And let's not forget that the medieval climate wasn't exactly predictable. A bad harvest could spell disaster, turning your Garden of Eden into a barren wasteland faster than you can say, crop failure. It's this precarious balance between spiritual ideals and earthly realities that defines monastic life. While the outside world is embroiled in power struggles and political intrigue, your monastery is a microcosm of self-sufficiency, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of scarcity. You're not just surviving, you're thriving in your own quiet way. But don't let this serene image fool you into thinking it's all smooth sailing. The scarcity of resources often leads to tough decisions. When times are lean, you might find yourself stretching that pottage with a little extra water or foraging for wild greens in the countryside. It's a constant juggling act, one that requires both faith and pragmatism. And just as your thoughts start to drift toward the challenges of the coming harvest, you're reminded that the monastery's isolation is both its greatest strength and its biggest vulnerability. In a world where trade is as erratic as medieval weather, being self-sufficient is a blessing and a curse. You're shielded from the whims of the market, but also cut off from its potential benefits. The monastery becomes a fortress against the chaos of the world, but it's also a reminder of your dependence on the land and each other. As you finish your meal, the bell tolls, calling you back to the rhythm of monastic life. It's a sound that marks the passage of time, a constant reminder of the cycle of work and prayer that defines your days. Your midday break has been a brief respite, a moment to reflect on the delicate balance between spiritual devotion and earthly survival. It's a dance as old as time, one that continues to shape the course of your life and the future of the monastery. With the last spoonful of pottage warming your insides, you rise from the table, ready to embrace the afternoon's labor. Whether it's tending to the garden, transcribing manuscripts, or simply contemplating the mysteries of faith, you know that each task is a vital thread in the tapestry of monastic life. This existence might lack the glamour and grandeur of a king's court, but it's rich in its own way, built on resilience, resourcefulness, and the quiet satisfaction of a life lived with purpose. As the afternoon sun casts long shadows across the cloister, you find yourself once again at the center of this unique world, where the spiritual and the practical intertwine in a complex dance of devotion and determination. The challenges of the day are far from over, and yet there's a certain comfort in knowing that you are part of a tradition that stretches back centuries, a legacy of faith and fortitude that will endure long after you've laid down your quill and hoe. As the sun dips lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the cloister, you prepare to dive into the afternoon's labor. This isn't just about maintaining the monastery, it's about fueling an entire microeconomy. Forget the solitary monk in a dimly lit cell. Here, you're more like a cog in a well-oiled machine of medieval industry. First up, let's talk fields. The monastery's lands are its lifeblood, yielding crops that feed not just the monks, but also the local community. It's no small feat. Farming requires as much strategic planning as a military campaign. With a workforce of monks and local laborers, you're contributing to a system that keeps both your bellies and coffers full. By the way, ever heard of the three-field system? It's a crop rotation method that's revolutionary for its time. One field lies fallow, one grows wheat or barley, and the other is planted with legumes. This spiffy system boosts soil fertility and maximizes yields, making your monastery a powerhouse of agricultural production. But you're not just plowing fields all day. Enter the workshop, a medieval startup if ever there was one. Each monastery is a hub of skilled trades, from brewing to textile production. Yes, monks are the original craft brewers. Your ale isn't just a breakfast staple, it's a hot commodity in the local economy. Ale brewing is a precise science with an economic punch. A single batch can fetch enough revenue to fund monastery repairs or charitable acts. Think of it as ethanol with a side of altruism. And then there's textile production. Spinning wool is a job that's both meditative and financially rewarding. The monastery's textiles are known for their quality, and they're not just for personal use. They're traded and sold, contributing to the local economy. Plus, the dyes used, like woad for blue or madder for red, are sourced from near and far, weaving a tapestry of global trade routes into your daily grind. Speaking of trade, The monastery is a key player in the local economy, often acting as a middleman for goods that travel far beyond the cloister walls. The economic impact of monastic labor is like the medieval version of a stimulus package. Your agriculture, brewing, and textiles create ripples that spread through the community, providing jobs and goods. It's not just about self-sufficiency, it's about economic influence. Now, let's bust a myth, the idea that monks are solely spiritual beings. While piety is part of the gig, so is entrepreneurship. You're a jack of all trades, a master of both prayer and productivity. These monasteries are less about isolation and more about integration into the economic fabric of medieval society. You're not just keeping the faith, you're keeping the books balanced, too. Ever wonder why a monk might make a better economist than a philosopher? Consider this. Your abbot is an adept financial planner, managing lands and resources with the finesse of a modern-day CEO. The monastery's economic strategies ensure that it remains influential, both spiritually and materially. In an age where wealth equals power, the abbey's coffers are a fortress of influence, and don't overlook the social implications. Monasteries serve as safety nets for the community, offering charity and shelter to those in need. This isn't just altruism, it's savvy social policy. By supporting the local populace, the monastery ensures its own stability. The goodwill generated is a currency unto itself, trading in the realm of human capital. Yet, it's not all smooth sailing. The economic prowess of the monastery can attract envy and tension. Local lords may eye your prosperity with suspicion, seeing it as a challenge to their authority. It's a delicate dance of diplomacy, where your abbot must navigate the treacherous waters of feudal power dynamics. You're not just a monk, you're part of a power structure that rivals the secular authorities. As the afternoon wears on, the rhythm of work is punctuated by the call to prayer, a reminder of the spiritual core at the heart of this economic juggernaut. The balance between labor and liturgy is a tightrope walk, where each moment is an act of devotion, whether to God or to the art of brewing a particularly fine ale. In the end, your role as a monk in this medieval ecosystem is a study in contrasts. You're seen as both a humble servant of God and a shrewd manager of resources. The dual nature of your existence is a testament to the complexity of monastic life in the 12th century. As you engage in the afternoon's labor, you're contributing to a legacy that's as much about economic clout as it is about spiritual enlightenment. So, as you put down your tools and head back to the cloister, there's a sense of fulfillment in knowing that your work is far more than the sum of its parts. It's a tapestry of faith and toil, of prayer and production, woven into the very fabric of medieval society. And with each stitch, each brewed batch, and each field sown, you leave a mark that will resonate far beyond the cloister walls. This is the real story behind the robe, the monk as a mover and shaker in a world where every action has both spiritual and economic weight. As the shadows lengthen and the day's labor winds down, you find yourself headed toward the chapel for evening prayers. The monastery is a place where time is divided by the tolling of bells, and the rhythmic cycle of prayer and work is its heartbeat. Vespers, the penultimate service of the day, is where the spiritual and temporal worlds converge in a symphony of chant and silence. It's a time to pause, reflect, and recalibrate, essential in a life that demands as much from the body as it does from the soul. The importance of these rituals is anything but trivial. In a world where literacy is rare and books are more precious than jewels, the spoken word carries immense weight. Chanting the Psalms isn't just a spiritual exercise. It's an educational tool, a way to internalize scripture in an era when personal Bibles are as common as unicorn sightings. The rhythm of the chants, the incense wafting through the air, the flicker of candlelight, all these elements are meticulously crafted to elevate the senses and focus the mind. It's a cocktail of sensory experiences designed to pull you away from worldly distractions and immerse you in a state of contemplation. But let's not kid ourselves. The life of a monk isn't just about spiritual devotion. It's a tightrope walk between heaven and earth. While you might be chanting about eternal salvation, you're also worried about the next tax tithe or the looming threat of Viking raids. This tension isn't just an existential dilemma. It's a reflection of the broader historical context. The 12th century is a time of significant monastic reform, with movements like the Cistercians advocating for a return to simpler, more austere practices. It's a pushback against the opulence that some monasteries have accumulated, a call to refocus on spiritual rather than material wealth. Here's the kicker. While these reforms aim to curb excess, they simultaneously highlight the economic and political clout of monastic institutions. The very fact that reforms are needed underscores just how entwined monasteries have become with worldly concerns. The abbey is not just a spiritual haven, it's a landowner, an employer, a political entity. The abbot may wear a robe, but he might as well wear a suit of armor for all the battles, literal and metaphorical, he has to navigate, and this is where the myth of the monk's simple life really crumbles. Romanticized visions of serene solitude give way to the reality of complex, multifaceted existence. Sure, you live in a cloister, but you're not cloistered from the world's problems. You're a monk, but also a manager, a mediator, and occasionally a mover and shaker in the medieval chess game of power and influence. Let's talk numbers for a moment, because nothing busts myths quite like cold, hard data. The monastery might own thousands of acres of land, with rents and tithes providing a steady income stream. In some cases, a single abbey could control assets equivalent to a small kingdom, wielding influence over local lords and even kings. This isn't just a place of prayer, it's a financial powerhouse, a testament to the intricate dance between faith and finance. And then there's the political angle. Monasteries often find themselves in the thick of power struggles, whether it's arbitrating disputes between feuding nobles or serving as a safe haven for those on the wrong side of a coup. Your monastery might even host royal visitors, and while everyone's on their best behavior, it's a game of thrones with a side of piety. The abbot's diplomacy can sway decisions that affect not just the monastery, but the region at large. Who knew that pious devotion could double as political acumen? Yet, amidst all these worldly entanglements, the spiritual core remains. Evening prayers serve as a reminder of the higher calling that brought you here. As the chants rise, you feel the day's burdens lift, if only for a moment. It's a chance to reconnect with the divine, to find solace in the familiar cadence of ancient words. The rituals offer a semblance of stability, a constant in a world where change often comes at the point of a sword. As you exit the chapel, the moon casts a silvery glow over the cloister, and you're left to ponder the paradoxes of monastic life. In a way, the monastery is a microcosm of the world, a place where the sacred and the secular, the spiritual and the material, coexist in a delicate balance. It's a reminder that while the life of a monk might appear simple from the outside, it's anything but. It's a life of complexity, a tapestry woven from threads of devotion, duty, and diplomacy. And so, as you retire to your cell, the weight of history and tradition rests heavily on your shoulders. You're part of a legacy that stretches back centuries, a custodian of both faith and knowledge. The day's end brings not just rest, but reflection, a chance to consider the impact of your daily actions on the broader tapestry of medieval life. The simplicity of monastic life is in itself a myth. It's a narrative crafted by those who see only the surface, missing the intricate network of responsibilities and challenges that define your existence. As the night deepens, you drift into sleep, the day's reflections still swirling in your mind. Tomorrow will bring another cycle of prayer and work, another chance to engage in the timeless dance of monastic life. In this unique world, where every action has both spiritual and worldly significance, you find purpose and peace. The romance of monastic life may be a myth, but the reality is far richer, a testament to human resilience and the enduring quest for meaning in a complex world. Winston Churchill might just be the poster child for the idea that you don't have to play by the rules to win the game. And if there's one thing that can be said about his early life, it's that he never quite fit the mold of what you'd expect from a future wartime leader. While most people like to think of leaders as born prodigies, spewing wisdom from their diapers, Churchill's beginnings were more like a comedy of errors. If his teachers had their way, the guy might have ended up as a perpetual underachiever rather than the British Bulldog we know today. Churchill's school reports were the stuff of nightmares for any parent hoping to brag at the PTA meeting. His teachers at Harrow School were brutally honest, describing him as a boy with no ambition and a tendency to coast through life on the bare minimum. One might have thought he was destined to be the kind of person who struggles to remember if they left the iron on, rather than the man who would later remind a nation to never surrender. The irony, of course, is delicious. Now, what made Churchill tick? Well, cigars and whiskey, for starters. The man was rarely seen without a cigar smouldering between his lips. He reportedly puffed through about 250,000 cigars in his lifetime. That's right, 250,000. His love for whiskey was equally legendary. Churchill was known to start his day with a glass of whiskey and soda, and he didn't exactly stop at one. Perhaps it was his way of preparing for the inevitable chaos that would unfold. After all, it's hard to get stressed about world domination when you've got a nice buzz going. His eccentricity didn't just stop at tobacco and booze. Churchill had a penchant for working in bed, often dictating memos and barking orders from under the covers. He believed that pajamas were perfectly acceptable work attire, and who are we to argue with success? Some say he was a night owl, but really, he blurred the lines between day and night like a bad jet lag victim. At one point, he even maintained a bath in the middle of a bombing raid, cool as a cucumber steeped in gin. Politically, Churchill's early career was a roller coaster with more dips than peaks. He switched political parties like some people change socks. Starting as a conservative, he jumped ship to the Liberals in 1904, only to return to the Conservatives in 1924. His political zigzagging earned him the nickname, the Rat who joined the sinking ship. Yet, this opportunistic flexibility turned out to be a strength when navigating the choppy waters of wartime politics. Churchill's unconventional approach was precisely what Britain needed on the eve of war. While the world was tilting toward chaos, his obstinacy and flair for dramatics offered a peculiar kind of stability. Britain didn't need a cookie-cutter leader. It needed someone who could think outside the box, or the cigar case, as it were. His brashness and unyielding confidence were both his greatest weaknesses and his most potent tools. When Nazi Germany was storming through Europe like a bull in a china shop, Britain needed a leader who wasn't afraid to butt heads. And let's not forget his speeches. Churchill had a knack for making the English language dance like Fred Astaire in Tales. His words could rally a nation or cut through political nonsense like a hot knife through butter. His speeches were a masterclass in oratory, full of grit, determination, and enough quotable lines to fill a book. "We shall fight on the beaches," he proclaimed, and you could almost hear the sound of 1,000 jaws dropping. He turned the English language into a weapon, and the world took notice. Churchill's early life taught him how to navigate the absurdity of politics and the unpredictability of human nature. He was the child of an American socialite and a British lord, giving him a foot in two worlds and a unique perspective on the global stage. His mother, Jenny Jerome, was a force of nature in her own right, and some say her tenacity rubbed off on young Winston. His father, Lord Randolph Churchill, was a larger-than-life figure whose early death left a lasting impact on Winston's ambition. Despite his tumultuous early life, Churchill had a talent for reinvention. His career was full of false starts and unexpected turns, much like a soap opera that keeps getting renewed because people can't stop watching. Yet, every setback seemed to fuel his drive. His wit and charisma, coupled with a knack for seeing the bigger picture, allowed him to rise above the fray and lead a nation through its darkest hours. So, as the storm clouds of World War II gathered, Britain wasn't looking for a flawless hero. They needed someone who understood the chaos of the world and wasn't afraid to dive headfirst into it. Winston Churchill, with all his idiosyncrasies, was that person. He was a man who saw the world for what it was, a mess of contradictions and challenges, and knew that sometimes the only way to deal with it was with a cigar in one hand and a glass of whiskey in the other. As Europe teetered on the brink of collapse, Winston Churchill was thrust into the hot seat as Britain's Prime Minister in May 1940. Talk about trial by fire. It was like being handed the controls of a plane mid-nosedive, and there wasn't a manual in sight. Hitler was storming through France faster than you could say Wehrmacht, and the British expeditionary forces were stuck like fish in a barrel at Dunkirk. If this was a movie, it'd be a thriller with a twist of dark comedy. The stakes? Oh, just the future of Western civilization. Now, Dunkirk. It's often painted as a story of stiff upper lips and British resilience, but let's cut through the fog of myth. The reality was less heroic stand and more get the heck out of Dodge. By late May, the British and their allies found themselves cornered by German forces. Picture 338,000 troops stranded on a beach, not exactly the ideal spot for a military picnic. The Germans, under General Gerd von Rundstedt, were closing in with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The British had to evacuate, and fast. Cue Operation Dynamo, the audacious plan to pull off a large-scale evacuation. It was a logistical nightmare wrapped in a ticking time bomb. The Royal Navy threw everything it had into the mix. Destroyers, yachts, fishing boats, anything that could float was drafted into service. Over 800 vessels, manned by a motley crew of military personnel and civilian volunteers, set sail to rescue the troops. And here's the kicker. It worked, sort of. Between May 26 and June 4, 1940, these makeshift armadas ferried hundreds of thousands of soldiers back to Britain. The operation was a staggering feat of coordination, but it was far from a victory lap. It was a retreat, plain and simple, albeit one that saved a significant chunk of Britain's military might. Churchill, ever the maestro of spin, took this debacle and turned it into a narrative of defiance. His speeches during this time were high-octane fuel for the British spirit. Take his address to the House of Commons on June 4, 1940. "We shall fight on the beaches," he thundered, as if daring anyone to question Britain's resolve. It was oratory alchemy, turning leaden defeat into golden determination. The speech was a masterclass in rallying the troops, figuratively and literally. Churchill knew the power of narrative. He understood that in dark times, people need a story, something to cling onto like a lifeboat in stormy seas. But let's not get carried away. The Dunkirk spirit might sound romantic, but the situation was dire. The Germans had captured nearly 40,000 British troops, and the loss of equipment was colossal. Over 2,000 artillery pieces, 20,000 motorcycles, and a staggering 65,000 vehicles were left behind. The British Army was essentially stripped down to its skivvies. These were the cold, hard facts behind the curtain of Churchill's rousing rhetoric. The economic context was equally grim. Britain was bleeding resources, and the war was a financial sinkhole. By the end of 1940, the debt was piling up like a bad credit card bill, and the United States, not yet in the war, was watching from the sidelines with its wallet half open. Lend-lease, anyone. It was like going to a friend and asking for a loan while holding a YOLO sign. Not exactly a position of strength, but needs must when the devil drives. On a personal level, Churchill was relentless. The man barely slept, driven by a sense of destiny and a hefty dose of caffeine. His work ethic was as legendary as his eccentricities. Despite the chaos, he maintained a clear vision for what he believed was Britain's moral and strategic path. His leadership style was not without its critics, though. Some thought him too bullish, too willing to gamble. But in a world gone mad, maybe a little madness was what was needed. Churchill's speeches, filled with his trademark wit and gravitas, were not just words. They were weapons in a psychological war. The British public needed to believe that their country could stand tall, even if it was on shaky legs. It's a testament to the power of storytelling, the ability to reshape perception with a well-timed phrase or an evocative metaphor. Churchill understood that fighting in the realm of ideas was as crucial as any battle fought with guns and tanks. The evacuation at Dunkirk was a turning point, not because it was a victory, but because it was a survival story against all odds. It was a testament to human resilience, and if we're being honest, a bit of sheer luck. The skies were mercifully cloudy, keeping the Luftwaffe at bay, and Hitler's infamous halt order gave the Allies a crucial breather. Why did he issue it? Historians still debate whether it was overconfidence, a strategic blunder, or just one of those enigmatic moments that history throws our way. So, as the sun set on the beaches of Dunkirk, Churchill had managed to pull a rabbit out of a hat, or at least a sizable portion of the British Army out of France. The Dunkirk spirit became a rallying cry, a symbol of tenacity in the face of adversity. But let's not forget, it was a spirit born from the chaos of retreat, not the glory of victory. In the grand tapestry of World War II, Dunkirk was a thread spun from desperation and hope, entwined with the grit of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. As Churchill looked out over a nation battered, but unbowed, he knew that the battle for Britain was just beginning. The skies would soon be filled with the roar of engines and the rattle of machine guns as the Luftwaffe prepared to take the fight to British soil. But that, my friends, is a tale for another day. Stay tuned, as we dive deeper into the stormy seas of World War II, where Churchill's leadership would continue to be tested, and history would be written in the skies above. And so, as the Luftwaffe revved up for their aerial assault, Churchill was gearing up for what would be dubbed the Battle of Britain, a name that sounds like it was cooked up by a marketing genius. But behind the cinematic title lay a brutal reality. Hitler had decided that London was next on his European tour, and the only thing standing between him and a cross-channel invasion was the Royal Air Force. The stakes were sky-high, literally and figuratively. The summer of 1940 was a sweaty, nerve-wracking affair. Britain was isolated, and Churchill knew that if the RAF couldn't hold the line, a Nazi invasion was more than just a dystopian nightmare. It was a looming possibility. The RAF was outnumbered, with about 650 fighters to Germany's 600. You don't need to be a math whiz to see those odds aren't exactly in your favor. But despite the numerical disadvantage, the RAF had a few aces up its sleeve, including the legendary Spitfire and Hurricane aircraft. These sleek machines were the pride and joy of British engineering, and they were about to be put to the ultimate test. Churchill, the master gambler, was all in. He famously declared, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few," a phrase that not only became iconic, but also set the tone for the entire campaign. It was a nod to the RAF pilots, those brave souls with nerves of steel and probably a few screws loose, who were tasked with keeping the skies clear. But let's not romanticize too much. The reality was terrifying. These pilots faced death daily, engaged in dogfights that were as deadly as they were dizzying. The average age of these aerial nights, just 20 years old. They were barely old enough to rent a car today, yet there they were, fighting for the future of Europe at 20,000 feet. The battle raged from July to October 1940, with the RAF and Luftwaffe locked in a deadly tango over the English Channel. The Germans initially targeted airfields and radar stations, but soon turned their focus to the cities, hoping to break British morale. Londoners became accustomed to the eerie wail of air raid sirens, and the Blitz transformed daily life into a grim routine of duck and cover. But the British spirit, buoyed by Churchill's rhetoric, was anything but broken. In fact, his speeches were like verbal Red Bull for the weary populace. Lines like "their finest hour" and "we shall never surrender" became mantras, repeated in bomb shelters and kitchens alike. Churchill's relationship with his military leaders during this time was a mixed bag. On one hand, he was a strategic visionary, able to grasp the big picture with uncanny clarity. On the other, he could be maddeningly stubborn, clashing with his chiefs over tactics and priorities. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, head of Fighter Command, often found himself at odds with Churchill's more aggressive instincts. Dowding advocated for a defensive strategy, focusing on conserving resources and protecting pilots, a plan that ultimately proved successful. But Churchill was restless, always wanting to take the fight to the enemy. Their dynamic was a classic case of head vs. heart, and while their disagreements were sometimes heated, both men shared a common goal: victory at all costs. Churchill's strategic gambles didn't stop with the RAF. He was also instrumental in forging crucial alliances, most notably with the United States. Recognizing that Britain couldn't go it alone, Churchill worked tirelessly to woo American support. His charm offensive included everything from heartfelt letters to President Roosevelt to more subtle nods to shared Anglo-American values. It was a diplomatic dance, and Churchill was the Fred Astaire of the international stage. The Lend-Lease Act of 1941, which saw the U.S. supply Britain with much-needed military aid, was one of his crowning achievements in this regard. But this wasn't just a case of Churchill sweet-talking Uncle Sam. It was a shrewd recognition of geopolitical realities. Britain needed the U.S., and Churchill wasn't shy about asking for help. The financial context was equally complex. War is expensive, and Britain's coffers were bleeding dry. By the end of 1940, the national debt was a staggering £3 billion, a sum that would make even the most spendthrift politician wince. Churchill's government had to make tough choices, rationing everything from food to fuel to keep the war machine running. And yet, amidst the austerity, Churchill managed to maintain public confidence. His ability to communicate not just the sacrifices, but the reasons behind them was crucial. People were willing to tighten their belts because they believed in the cause, and in the man who had become its living symbol. But let's not paint Churchill as a flawless hero. His leadership was not without its blemishes. Some of his decisions were, to put it mildly, questionable. The disastrous Norwegian campaign of 1940, which saw British and French forces humiliated by a smaller German contingent, was a case in point. Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, had been a key advocate for the operation, which ended in a fiasco that nearly derailed his political career. Yet even here, Churchill showed a remarkable ability to bounce back. He was, in many ways, the political equivalent of a cat with 9 lives, always landing on his feet just when it seemed like he'd used up his last chance. As the Battle of Britain drew to a close in October 1940, it became clear that Churchill's gambles had paid off, at least for now. The Luftwaffe had been repelled, and Hitler's plans for Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain, were put on indefinite hold. It was a turning point, not just in the war, but in Churchill's leadership. His faith in the RAF, his ability to rally the nation, and his relentless pursuit of international support had kept Britain afloat during its darkest hour. Yet the victory was bittersweet. The human cost was enormous, with over 500 RAF pilots killed and many more wounded. The cities bore the scars of relentless bombing, and the civilian population had endured unimaginable hardship. But in the ashes of destruction, there was a renewed sense of purpose. Churchill had managed to galvanize a nation, transforming fear into defiance and uncertainty into resolve. As Britain braced for the next chapter in this global conflict, Churchill's leadership was more crucial than ever. The Battle of Britain had been won, but the war was far from over. The spectre of Nazi domination still loomed large, and Churchill knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. Yet, for all the uncertainty, there was one thing he was certain of. Britain would never stand down, not as long as he had breath in his body and fire in his belly. And so, as the world held its breath, Churchill prepared to face the next wave of trials with the same indomitable spirit. The fight for freedom was far from finished, and Churchill, with all his eccentricities and audacious gambles, was the man to lead it. As we delve deeper into the tumultuous years of World War II, we'll see just how far the British Bulldog was willing to go to defend his homeland. Stay tuned, because the story of Winston Churchill is just getting started, and trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. And so, as the world held its breath, Churchill prepared to face the next wave of trials with the same indomitable spirit. The fight for freedom was far from finished, and Churchill, with all his eccentricities and audacious gambles, was the man to lead it. But as 1942 rolled around, Churchill was about to discover that even the bravest Bulldog needed a pack. Enter stage left, the United States of America, with its industrial might and penchant for grand entrances. December 7, 1941, was the proverbial slap in the face that jolted America awake. The attack on Pearl Harbor was a seismic event. Rattling the isolationist stance, many Americans had clung to like a life raft in a tempestuous sea. Overnight, the U.S. morphed from a reluctant bystander to a full-blown participant in the global melee. Churchill, always one for dramatic flair, remarked that he slept the sleep of the saved upon hearing the news. He understood that Uncle Sam was the ally Britain desperately needed to tip the scales against the Axis powers. But let's not romanticize Churchill as the lone hero standing against the tide. The truth is, he was more like the charismatic frontman of a rock band, while his allies provided the essential rhythm section. Roosevelt's entry into the war was a game-changer, and Churchill knew it. He wasn't shy about cozying up to FDR, cementing a transatlantic bromance that was part strategy, part necessity. The two leaders exchanged over 700 messages during the war, a testament to their enduring partnership and the importance of clear communication when the world's on fire. Now, onto the North Africa campaign, where Churchill's strategic acumen and international alliances were put to the test. By mid-1942, the desert sands of North Africa were more than just a scenic backdrop. They were a key battleground. The campaign was as much about controlling the Mediterranean and protecting the Suez Canal as it was about kicking Axis forces out of the neighborhood. The British 8th Army, under General Bernard Montgomery, squared off against Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, who had a knack for turning sand dunes into defensive masterpieces. Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa, kicked off in November 1942, with American and British forces staging a joint invasion along the Moroccan and Algerian coasts. It was a logistical beast, involving over 107,000 troops and a flotilla of 850 ships. This wasn't just a military operation. It was a statement, a declaration that the Allies were ready to take the fight to the enemy on multiple fronts. But let's pause and question the myth of the solitary genius. Churchill was not orchestrating this war single-handedly from his bathtub. The success of Operation Torch hinged on collaboration, compromise, and a fair bit of cajoling. Churchill had to balance the egos and agendas of his military commanders, while also navigating the sometimes choppy diplomatic waters with Roosevelt. It was a delicate dance, requiring the finesse of a seasoned diplomat and the patience of a saint. The North Africa campaign wasn't all sunshine and victory parades, though. The Allies faced tough resistance from Axis forces, and initial progress was slow, like wading through treacle while wearing lead boots. The Battle of Kasserine Pass in early 1943 was a wake-up call for the Americans, who suffered a bruising defeat at the hands of Rommel's forces. It was a stark reminder that the path to victory was strewn with pitfalls, and that overconfidence could be as deadly as any enemy shell. Yet, by May 1943, the tide had turned. The Axis powers were pushed out of North Africa, leading to the surrender of over 275,000 troops, a significant blow to Hitler's war machine. Churchill, ever the wordsmith, described it as the end of the beginning, a phrase that captured the bittersweet nature of the campaign. It was a victory, yes, but one that came at a cost, with thousands of Allied lives lost and lessons learned the hard way. In the broader context, the North Africa campaign was a proving ground for Allied cooperation. It was the first major operation where American and British forces fought side by side, laying the groundwork for future collaborations. It was also a testament to the importance of logistics and supply chains, the unsung heroes of any military campaign. Without the steady flow of resources across the Atlantic, the Allied forces would have been dead in the water, or in this case, the desert. Churchill's role as a diplomatic juggler was also crucial. While he shared a genuine rapport with Roosevelt, his relationship with Joseph Stalin was a different beast altogether. Stalin, the Soviet strongman with a penchant for paranoia, was a difficult ally. But Churchill understood that keeping the USSR in the fight was essential, especially after the brutal battles on the Eastern Front. The Tehran Conference in late 1943 marked a pivotal moment in the Allied alliance, with Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin meeting face-to-face to hash out their grand strategy. These meetings were anything but straightforward. Churchill had to temper his natural inclination towards grandstanding with the practicalities of coalition warfare. He was acutely aware that the political and military objectives of the Allies didn't always align. Sometimes, diplomacy felt like a game of three-dimensional chess, with each leader guarding their pawns while eyeing the queen. Yet, the outcome of these negotiations was vital, setting the stage for future operations that would eventually lead to the downfall of the Axis powers. As we delve deeper into these turning points, it's essential to remember that history is not a series of isolated events, but a tapestry of interconnected decisions, personalities, and circumstances. Churchill's leadership during this period was marked by his ability to navigate these complexities, recognizing that victory required more than just military might. It demanded unity, resolve, and a healthy dose of pragmatism. So, while the legend of Churchill as the solitary savior makes for a compelling narrative, the reality is far richer and more nuanced. He was a leader who understood the power of alliances, the importance of logistics, and the necessity of compromise. And as 1943 drew to a close, Churchill knew that the war was far from over, but the pieces were beginning to fall into place for the next phase of the Allied campaign, a story that promises even more twists and turns. Stay tuned, because the tale of Churchill and World War II is far from reaching its crescendo. As the gears of war continued grinding into 1944, Churchill found himself on a political seesaw, balancing the weight of military decisions with the future of a post-war world that was creeping ever closer. The Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, D-Day to you and me, was the culmination of years of planning, deceit, and a whole lot of convincing. It was like staging the world's largest surprise party, except the guests were the German forces, and the gift was a one-way ticket out of France. The numbers were staggering. Over 156,000 Allied troops stormed the beaches, supported by 11,590 aircraft and nearly 7,000 vessels. It was a logistical symphony, and Churchill played a key role, though not without a few nerves. He reportedly wanted to observe the landings firsthand, only to be talked out of it by his worried military chiefs. They probably had visions of him rowing ashore with a cigar clamped between his teeth, barking orders like the world's most eccentric beachcomber. D-Day was a turning point. The Allies had established a foothold in Western Europe, and the end of the war was in sight. But the post-war landscape was a beast of a different nature, and Churchill knew it. The Yalta Conference in February 1945 brought Churchill together with Roosevelt and Stalin, the triumvirate of Allied leaders meeting to decide the fate of a war-torn Europe. Picture a high-stakes poker game where everyone's bluffing, and the chips are entire countries. Churchill, ever the realist, was wary of Stalin's intentions, and not without reason. The Soviet Union, having borne the brunt of the Eastern Front, was poised to exert considerable influence on Europe's future. Churchill's concern was that the Iron Curtain, the metaphorical divide between Western democracies and Eastern communist states, was already descending across the continent, a concern he would famously articulate in his 1946 speech at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri. But let's not jump ahead. Economically, Britain was on life support. The war had drained its financial reserves, leaving a debt that ballooned to over £21 billion by 1945, an eye-watering sum for any era. Churchill had been the face of wartime resilience, yet as peace loomed, his focus on the global chessboard began to feel out of step with the domestic demands for reconstruction and reform. The British public, understandably exhausted by years of rationing and sacrifice, craved change. Enter the 1945 general election, a seismic event where Churchill, the wartime hero, found himself pitted against the Labour Party, led by Clement Attlee. It was like seeing your favourite rock band play a stadium show, only to be upstaged by a fresh new act with a catchy tune and a promise of better days. Churchill's campaign leaned heavily on his wartime accomplishments, but the public was more interested in what came next. The Beveridge Report of 1942, which laid the groundwork for the welfare state, was the siren song of social reform that resonated with a nation weary of conflict. And then it happened, the electoral defeat that was as shocking as it was historic. On July 26, 1945, the results were in, and Churchill was unceremoniously ousted from office. The Conservatives won 197 seats to Labour's 393, a landslide that was less a rebuke of Churchill personally and more a desire for a new direction. Britain, it seemed, was ready to trade in the old warhorse for a fresh start, with Attlee promising housing, employment, and social security. Who knew a hero could become yesterday's news so swiftly? But let's not rewrite Churchill's legacy as a tale of woe. His post-war influence, though diminished, was far from extinguished. In March 1946, during his tour of the United States, Churchill delivered the Iron Curtain speech, a stark warning of the Soviet threat and the ideological divide gripping Europe. It was a call to arms for the Western powers to stand firm against the spread of communism, and it resonated deeply, setting the tone for the Cold War years to come. Churchill's ability to articulate the challenges of the New World Order was unmatched, but his political clout in Britain didn't see an immediate revival. It wasn't until 1951, at the ripe age of 76, that Churchill returned to 10 Downing Street as Prime Minister. His second term was more of a victory lap than a new chapter, marked by efforts to maintain Britain's global influence amidst the shifting sands of geopolitics. Yet, even in his twilight years, Churchill remained a towering figure, a symbol of steadfast determination and unyielding resolve. His leadership during World War II was characterized by a unique blend of charisma, strategic insight, and a healthy disregard for convention. He wasn't without his flaws, his stubbornness, his sometimes questionable decisions. But it was these very human traits that made him relatable, even as he navigated the complexities of global politics. In the end, Churchill's legacy is a tapestry of contradictions. He was a man who could rouse a nation with his words, yet struggled to adapt to a peacetime political landscape. He was a leader who saw the world in stark terms, yet understood the nuances of diplomacy and alliance building. His life, much like his wartime strategies, was a series of calculated risks and bold gambles, some successful, others less so. As we close the book on Churchill's wartime leadership, it's essential to remember that history is never as clear-cut as the myths we tell ourselves. Churchill's story is one of complexity, a reminder that even the most iconic figures are not immune to the vagaries of time and circumstance. So, as you drift off to sleep with new knowledge tucked under your pillow, take a moment to appreciate the tapestry of history. A rich, intricate weave of triumphs and trials, where legends are born not from perfection, but from perseverance. And there you have it, the tale of Winston Churchill, a saga of cigars, speeches, setbacks, and ultimately a legacy that endures. It's a testament to the power of leadership, the importance of adaptability, and the enduring impact of one man's vision in the face of adversity. So, until our next historical escapade, remember, history is full of surprises, and the past is never quite as distant as it seems. In the swirling tapestry of China's history, the Tang Dynasty is that sparkling thread you just can't ignore. Picture this. It's 618 AD, and the Tang Dynasty struts onto the stage like a rock band at the peak of its career, bringing with it an era of glitz, glam, and a cultural renaissance that would make even the most jaded historians swoon. Before we dive into the porcelain phenomenon, let's set the scene. The Tang Dynasty was like the cool kid in school who not only aced every test, but also threw the best parties. Under the Tang, China transformed into a melting pot of ideas, art, and trade. It was a time when poets and artists were the tick-tock stars of the day, their work spreading faster than cat videos. Now, let's talk porcelain, the ancient world's equivalent of the iPhone. It wasn't just clay baked into fancy shapes. It was a status symbol, a technological marvel, and a must-have for any self-respecting Tang courtier. Anyone who was anyone had porcelain, and those who didn't probably pretended they did. But here's the kicker. Making porcelain wasn't just about throwing mud into a fire. Oh no, it was more like alchemy. You had to mix the right type of clay with the right minerals, and then fire it up to a scorching 300 degrees C. That's hot enough to turn your average kiln into a dragon's mouth. And if you think that sounds like a hot mess, you'd be right. But it was also an art form. The Tang court was obsessed with porcelain, not just because it was shiny and pretty, but because it was a symbol of sophistication and power. In the same way that modern tech companies release gadgets with much fanfare, the Tang court paraded porcelain as the epitome of refined taste. The material was so admired that it often served as diplomatic gifts, the ancient version of sending an influencer a PR package. I mean, what better way to say we're friends now than with a delicately crafted porcelain vase? But here's the real talk. Porcelain production was no easy feat. It required a level of precision and expertise that was akin to launching a spacecraft today. The process was labor-intensive, requiring skilled artisans who knew their stuff. These artisans weren't just playing with clay. They were the Steve Jobs of their time, innovating and perfecting the art to create something that was both functional and beautiful. And the Tang Dynasty, with its penchant for luxury and innovation, was the perfect incubator for such artistry. Let's not forget the economic implications. Porcelain wasn't just art, it was big business. The demand for these shiny objects was so high that entire regions became dedicated to their production. The legendary kilns of Changsha, for instance, weren't just producing porcelain for local use. They were exporting these treasures along the Silk Road to lands as far away as the Middle East and Africa, making a global splash long before globalization was a thing. The Tang Dynasty's love affair with porcelain wasn't just about aesthetics. It was a reflection of the time's economic prosperity and political stability. When you're not worried about barbarian invasions or peasant uprisings, you can afford to spend a little extra on home decor, right? Porcelain was a way for the Tang Dynasty to flex its cultural and economic muscles, showing the world that China was not just a country with a rich heritage, but a future filled with innovation and creativity. Now, let's debunk a common myth. The allure of porcelain wasn't solely about its beauty. Sure, a porcelain vase could be as eye-catching as a designer handbag, but it was also valued for its durability. Unlike other ceramics, porcelain was tough, almost indestructible, perfect for those who had a penchant for accidentally knocking things over. The Tang court understood this dual appeal, and it was no surprise that porcelain quickly became a staple in royal households. In terms of social status, owning porcelain was like having the latest Tesla parked in your driveway. It signaled to everyone that you were not just anybody, you were somebody. And in the Tang Dynasty, being somebody meant you had influence, respect, and a seat at the table where decisions were made. Porcelain was more than just a pretty object. It was a tool of social mobility and a marker of prestige. But let's pause for a moment and acknowledge the artisans, the real heroes behind the porcelain phenomenon. These folks were the unsung geniuses, spending countless hours perfecting their craft in kilns that could rival any modern-day startup incubator. Their dedication and skill turned simple clay into something that was not just functional, but a work of art. They were visionaries who took an ancient practice and elevated it to new heights, ensuring that the Tang Dynasty's legacy would be remembered not just for its conquests and poetry, but for its contributions to the world of art and commerce. In conclusion, the Tang Dynasty's rise around 618 AD set the stage for a cultural boom that would change the world forever. At the heart of this transformation was porcelain, a symbol of innovation and sophistication that captivated not just the Tang court, but civilizations far beyond China's borders. As we continue to explore this fascinating era, let's remember that the porcelain phenomenon was more than just a trend. It was a testament to human ingenuity and the relentless pursuit of excellence. So next time you sip your morning coffee from a porcelain mug, give a nod to those Tang Dynasty artisans who, in their own way, changed the course of history. And speaking of those unsung heroes, let's dive deeper into the technical marvels and economic forces that turned Tang porcelain into the world's obsession. I mean, we're talking about a product that was as hot as a tick-tock dance challenge, but with a little more staying power. At the heart of it all was the three-color glaze technique, a vibrant tapestry of green, yellow, and white that made the porcelain pop like a neon sign in a sepia-toned world. This wasn't just any glaze. It was the glaze to end all glazes, technically known as sankai, which translates to three colors, because sometimes ancient names were as straightforward as a text message from your mom. This method involved applying multiple layers of glaze and then firing the piece at around 800 degrees C. That's harder than your average summer's day, but still a bit cooler than a dragon's breath. The result, a kaleidoscope of colors that seemed to defy nature itself, a bit like the first time you saw a TV in color. Sankai wasn't just for the sake of visual flair, though. It was a brilliant marketing strategy. The Tang Dynasty understood that in the world of trade, aesthetics could be as persuasive as a good sales pitch. This glorious glaze became the ancient world's version of branding. If you were a merchant traveling along the Silk Road, those vivid colors were your assurance of authenticity. It was like spotting a genuine Gucci bag in a sea of knockoffs. But let's not get too starry-eyed here. The magical world of Tang porcelain had its downsides, and kiln work was definitely not for the faint-hearted. The artisans who crafted these treasures weren't exactly living their best lives. Imagine working in a kiln where temperatures soared higher than your summer AC bill, and occupational hazards included inhaling toxic fumes and burning yourself on red-hot ceramics. It was less like a Pinterest board of serene pottery making and more like a scene from an action movie without the glamorous paycheck. Speaking of paychecks, let's talk economics. Porcelain wasn't just a shiny object. It was the Bitcoin of its day, volatile, valuable, and everybody wanted in. The Tang economy was robust, with trade routes stretching from Korea to the Mediterranean, and porcelain was its golden ticket. A single piece could fetch a price that would make a Tang entrepreneur's eyes light up like a kid on Christmas morning. The kilns of Changsha, Yu, and Xing were the epicenters of this ceramic boom. These weren't just workshops. They were industrial powerhouses. Changsha alone produced enough pottery to fill an entire season of Antics roadshow. By the mid-8th century, the demand had reached such phenomenal levels that it practically kick-started a logistics industry. Imagine entire fleets of camels. Think of them as the Amazon prime of their time, trudging along the Silk Road, each one laden with porcelain that was worth its weight in gold. But why such demand? It wasn't just the allure of Sankai. Porcelain was durable, versatile, and let's be honest, it looked good in any setting. Whether you were a Tang courtier or a merchant in Baghdad, owning porcelain was like flashing a sleek new gadget. It said, "I've made it," without uttering a word. The Tang knew this and capitalized on it like a savvy tech company launching a new product line. However, let's debunk a myth while we're here. The notion that Tang porcelain production was a smooth, artistic process. In reality, it was more akin to a high-stakes gamble. The firing process was unpredictable, and a single misstep could turn a masterpiece into rubble. Artisans worked in conditions that would make even the toughest reality TV show seem like a walk in the park. The soot, the heat, the pressure, this was no artist's dream. It was a grueling, relentless pursuit of perfection. Yet, amidst all this chaos, there was innovation. The Tang artisans were the tech disruptors of their time, constantly refining their techniques to produce porcelain that was lighter, stronger, and more visually stunning. They experimented with firing temperatures and glaze compositions, pushing the boundaries of what clay could do. These innovations weren't just about making pretty objects, they were about efficiency and economy. The Tang Dynasty was a society that valued progress, and its porcelain was a testament to this relentless drive. In a way, the Tang's porcelain boom was a precursor to the modern industrial age, where mass production and art collided in a spectacular display of human ingenuity. It was a time when craftsmanship met commerce, and the result was nothing short of revolutionary. The Tang porcelain phenomenon was more than just a trend. It was a cultural and economic powerhouse that shaped the world's trading landscape. So, as we continue this journey through the Tang Dynasty's porcelain legacy, let's remember that behind every dazzling piece of Sankai was a story of grit, innovation, and a touch of madness. It was a world where artistry met adversity, and where the pursuit of beauty was both a dream and a harsh reality. And as we dig deeper into this fascinating era, we'll uncover more about how these shimmering artifacts became symbols of a dynasty that was as complex and captivating as the porcelain it produced. Stay tuned, because the story of Tang porcelain is far from over. While Tang artisans were busy turning clay into the ancient world's hardest commodity, their porcelain was poised to conquer the international stage with all the flair of a superstar on a world tour. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't just a spontaneous love affair with fancy crockery. It was a well-orchestrated campaign that saw porcelain sashaying its way down the Silk Road, capturing hearts from Korea to Persia, and even hitching a ride with the most unlikely of fans, the Vikings. You see, the Silk Road wasn't just some dusty trail. It was the internet of its day, a sprawling network that connected the East and West long before anyone thought of creating social media accounts. It spanned over 4,000 miles, linking China with the Mediterranean, and was the lifeline for merchants and traders eager to exchange silk, spices, and naturally porcelain. The Tang Dynasty knew this and used it to their advantage, turning porcelain into the ultimate ambassador. Porcelain wasn't just another trade item. It was a political tool, a tangible piece of China's soft power strategy. When Tang diplomats needed to smooth over relations with foreign courts, they didn't just send a fruit basket. No, they sent porcelain, and that delicate vase, or intricately painted bowl spoke volumes about China's artistic and economic clout. It was the ancient equivalent of a diplomatic handshake sealed with a gift so exquisite it often left foreign dignitaries speechless. But let's not romanticize this too much. The story that porcelain single-handedly saved diplomatic relations might be more myth than reality. Sure, a beautifully glazed vase could break the ice, but it wasn't going to end wars or stop invasions. The truth is, porcelain was more like the icing on a very complex cake of diplomacy, trade deals, and power plays. It didn't single-handedly save the day, but it certainly didn't hurt to have it in the arsenal. Speaking of arsenals, let's talk about the Vikings, those fearsome Norse warriors who were more likely to raid your village than peruse your porcelain collection. Yet, even these seafaring marauders couldn't resist the allure of Tang porcelain. Archaeological digs have uncovered Tang porcelain shards in Viking settlements, proving that even the toughest warriors had a soft spot for a good piece of crockery. This wasn't just a fluke. It was a testament to the reach of Tang trade networks and the universal appeal of porcelain. So how did these fragile treasures survive the rough and tumble journey from China to Scandinavia? Well, they were often transported in specially designed crates, cushioned with straw and packed as carefully as the most precious cargo. Think of it as the ancient version of bubble wrap. And while we're at it, let's bust another myth. Porcelain wasn't just for the elites. Sure, owning porcelain was still a status symbol, but it wasn't entirely out of reach for the upwardly mobile merchant class. In fact, the demand was so insatiable that it spurred innovation in shipping and trade logistics, with merchants developing new routes and methods to get their hands on the coveted wares. But why did porcelain become such a status symbol in foreign courts? The answer lies in its dual nature. It was both art and utility, beauty and brawn. Unlike the ceramics that came before it, porcelain was tough enough to withstand the rigors of daily use without losing its sheen. It was dishwasher-safe avant la lettre. This combination of form and function made it the ideal candidate for the dining tables and display cabinets of the world's elite. In places like the Abbasid Caliphate, Tang porcelain became the must-have item for any self-respecting aristocrat. It was a testament to one's wealth and sophistication, much like sporting a designer watch or driving a luxury car today. The caliphs of Baghdad, in particular, were so enamored with porcelain that they incorporated it into their architecture. Fragments of Tang porcelain have been found in palaces, mosques, and even the walls of the city itself, a literal mosaic of cultural exchange. But let's not pretend that all was rosy in the world of porcelain trade. The journey along the Silk Road was fraught with danger, from bandits to natural disasters. Merchants often traveled in caravans for safety, sharing resources and pooling their wares. It was a perilous but potentially lucrative venture, with profits that could transform a humble trader into a wealthy magnate. And while porcelain was a prized commodity, it was also a target for counterfeiters. Imitation, Sankai pieces began popping up, leading to a medieval version of brand protection, with merchants developing techniques to authenticate their goods. The political dynamics were equally complex. The Tang Dynasty had to maintain a delicate balance of power with its neighbors, using trade and diplomacy to keep the peace. Porcelain played its part, but it was never a silver bullet. Instead, it was one of many tools in a sophisticated diplomatic toolkit, a testament to the Tang Dynasty's understanding of soft power long before the term was coined. As we venture further into the tangled web of Tang porcelain's legacy, it's clear that this was more than just a trade in pretty objects. It was a cultural exchange, a political maneuver, and an economic engine that propelled the Tang Dynasty onto the global stage. The allure of porcelain lay not just in its beauty, but in its ability to transcend borders and connect disparate cultures, a symbol of a world that was far more interconnected than we might imagine. So as we continue our journey through the annals of Tang porcelain history, let's keep our eyes peeled for more tales of intrigue and innovation. Because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that the real story is often as complex and compelling as the myths we weave around it. And who knows what other surprises await us as we delve deeper into this fascinating chapter of history. Stay tuned, because the porcelain saga is just heating up. So, as we dive into the next chapter of our Tang porcelain saga, let's tackle the myth of the porcelain tower, a tale so tantalizing it could make even the most skeptical historian daydream about shimmering spires under a moonlit sky. Legend has it, this architectural marvel was a veritable beacon of Tang ingenuity, a Tower of Babel made not of bricks, but of porcelain. Sounds like a Pinterest board fantasy, right? Well, that's because it likely was. In reality, while the Tang Dynasty did have a penchant for grandiose architecture, like the Great Wild Goose Pagoda, they weren't slapping porcelain on towers like some ancient DIY project. The porcelain tower legend probably sprouted from later dynasties, particularly the Ming, who did indeed construct the famed porcelain tower of Nanjing. This was a structure that dazzled with its glazed tiles and stood as a testament to the enduring appeal of porcelain. But here's the catch. The Tang didn't build it. They were too busy perfecting the art of porcelain itself to construct skyscrapers out of it. Yet the myth endures, and why not? It's a compelling image, an entire tower shimmering like a giant vase in the sunlight. The appeal lies in its audacity, a dream of porcelain that transcends its role as tableware to become the stuff of legend. But let's not get lost in fantasy. The real magic was happening in the kilns, where artisans were laboring away, literally sweating the details. And speaking of those details, let's talk economics, because someone had to pay for all this ceramic wizardry. The romantic notion of porcelain being the product of inspired artistry overlooks a less glamorous truth. It was also a hefty financial endeavor. The Tang court might have been the biggest fanboys of porcelain, but they weren't footing the entire bill. That burden fell on the artisans and the local economies that supported them. Porcelain production wasn't cheap. It required a steady supply of high-quality kaolin clay, rare minerals for glazes, and wood for the furnaces. The cost of maintaining a kiln was no joke, akin to running a small factory today. And let's not forget the labor. Skilled artisans had to be paid, and their expertise didn't come cheap. They were the tech developers of their day, the ones who turned raw materials into something with a price tag that could rival a luxury car. This economic reality meant that porcelain production was often subsidized by local governments eager to cash in on the booming trade. The Tang Dynasty, while not directly funding every kiln, certainly encouraged production through state patronage and favorable trade policies. It was a classic case of trickle-down economics, Tang style. The artisans bore the brunt of production costs, while the court reaped the rewards in the form of diplomatic gifts and trade revenue. And here's a kicker. Porcelain wasn't just about aesthetics or economics. It was deeply intertwined with cultural narratives that often glossed over these grittier aspects. Take the myth of the dragon kiln, for instance, a tale that suggests porcelain was fired in kilns so long and powerful they resembled the sinuous body of a dragon. Lovely imagery, but in reality, these kilns were less about mythical creatures and more about maximizing production efficiency. They were built on slopes to take advantage of natural drafts, a practical solution wrapped in a romantic legend. These narratives served a purpose. They elevated the status of porcelain from mere commodity to a cultural icon, a symbol of China's artistic and technological prowess. But they also masked the laborious and often dangerous conditions faced by the workers. In truth, the artisans were more likely to encounter the fiery breath of actual kiln flames than any mythical dragon. Let's also debunk the notion that the porcelain trade was a smooth operation. It was fraught with risks, from the unpredictability of kiln firings to the perils of the Silk Road. A single crack in a vase could mean financial ruin for a merchant. This was high-stakes business, and the pressure was immense. The artisans weren't just creating art. They were gambling with their livelihoods, walking a tightrope between success and disaster. Yet, despite the challenges, or perhaps because of them, Tang porcelain became the gold standard. Its allure lay not just in its beauty, but in the stories it told. Stories of a dynasty that dared to dream big and reach for the stars, even if those stars were sometimes more fantasy than fact. The myths surrounding Tang porcelain remind us that history is as much about the stories we tell as the facts we uncover. So, as we journey further into this tale of Tang porcelain, let's keep our eyes open for more surprises. We've debunked myths, marveled at craftsmanship, and followed porcelain's journey from kiln to court. But there's more to uncover, more legends to question, more truths to reveal. As we continue, let's remember that behind every piece of porcelain is a story waiting to be told, a story that's as complex and captivating as the dynasty that created it. Stay tuned, because this porcelain puzzle is far from complete. As we pull the curtain back on Tang porcelain, it's time to ask the billion-dollar question. Why does this ancient art form still matter in our modern world? After all, we're talking about a tradition that started over a millennium ago, in a dynasty that was more concerned with poetry and peacocks than with the global commodities market. Yet here we are, still oohing and ahhing over porcelain as if it just rolled off the kiln yesterday. Let's start with the basics. Tang porcelain revolutionized the way we think about ceramics, setting a standard that still echoes through the halls of modern design. Its durability and delicate beauty were a breakthrough, akin to the invention of the microchip or the discovery of penicillin. Before Tang porcelain, ceramics were more likely to chip than charm. But the Tang dynasty, with its knack for turning the mundane into the magnificent, flipped the script. They gave us porcelain that was not just beautiful, but also robust enough to survive the perils of time and transport. This is why, even today, when we manufacture ceramics for everything from your grandma's teacups to the heat shields on NASA space shuttles, we're still chasing that Tang magic. And speaking of magic, let's talk about the global porcelain markets. We're not just talking about a few antique collectors here. The global ceramics market was valued at around $245 billion in 2020, with porcelain being a significant slice of that pie. It's like the Tang artisans who toiled away in their kilns had a crystal ball, foreseeing a future where their innovations would fuel an industry that spans continents and cultures. The techniques they developed, like the high-temperature firing and the meticulous blending of materials, are still the backbone of modern ceramics. So the next time you sip from a porcelain cup, remember, you're holding a piece of history, a legacy that's lasted longer than any dynasty. But let's not get too starry-eyed. While porcelain is a testament to human ingenuity, it's also a reminder of the less glamorous parts of our past. Those Tang artisans, the ones who made porcelain what it is today, weren't exactly living the high life. The conditions in those kilns were brutal, harder than a summer in the Sahara, and the pay was anything but princely. The economic realities that drove porcelain production were harsh, with artisans often treated as mere cogs in the Tang's grand machine. It's a story as old as time, the unsung heroes laboring in the shadows, while the glittering prizes go to those in power. Yet despite these harsh realities, porcelain managed to transcend its origins, becoming a symbol of culture and sophistication across the globe. From the palaces of Europe to the masks of the Middle East, Tang porcelain was a must-have for anyone who wanted to flaunt their status. It was the Rolex watch of its day, an object that whispered, or sometimes shouted, wealth and taste. Even today, owning a piece of authentic Tang porcelain is a badge of honor, a nod to a time when art and commerce danced a delicate waltz. And let's not forget the quirky ways this ancient art continues to influence us. Porcelain has found its way into some unexpected places, from the mundane to the extraordinary. Did you know that porcelain is used in high-tech applications, like electrical insulators, and even components in the Large Hadron Collider? It's as if the Tang artisans, with their focus on creating something both beautiful and functional, inadvertently laid the groundwork for the technological marvels of our age. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Tang porcelain's legacy is its ability to connect us to a shared human history. In an era where everything seems to be changing at breakneck speed, porcelain is a comforting constant. It's a reminder that while empires rise and fall, some things endure. The Tang dynasty may have been a whirlwind of cultural and economic innovation, but its greatest gift to us is the legacy of porcelain, a legacy that continues to shape our world in ways both big and small. So the next time you find yourself holding a piece of porcelain, take a moment to appreciate its journey. From the fiery kilns of ancient China to the shelves of modern homes, porcelain has traveled through time, a testament to the artistry and ambition of a civilization that dared to dream big. It's a story of resilience and innovation, of beauty and utility, and above all, of a legacy that refuses to fade away. And if that isn't a story worth telling, I don't know what is. So here's to Tang porcelain, a shining example of how the past can illuminate the future, one delicate glaze at a time. Sumeria, where civilization first figured out that if you plant seeds in straight lines and channel water to them, you might just end up with more time to ponder the mysteries of the universe, or at least decide who gets to be king of the mud bricks. Around 4,500 BCE, this stretch of Mesopotamia, a land that sounds as dry as a history textbook until you realize it's the birthplace of the urban lifestyle, was home to some of humanity's earliest overachievers. Forget the romanticized idea that these early people were just bumbling around inventing the wheel out of sheer boredom. The Sumerians were busy transforming the arid plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers into a bustling hub of innovation. Now, let's talk agriculture. The Sumerians didn't just stumble upon the idea of farming like a caveman discovering fire. No, these folks were the OG agricultural engineers. They invented the plow, which, let's be honest, was a total game changer, a prehistoric John Deere, if you will. Imagine going from poking at the ground with a stick to having an oxen-pulled contraption that could till the fields. This invention wasn't just about saving backs from eternal hunching. It was about efficiency. It was about feeding a growing population that was getting a taste of this newfangled urban life, and quite frankly liking it. But wait, there's more. The Sumerians took a look at the unpredictable flooding of the Euphrates and Tigris and thought, why not make this work for us? Enter the irrigation system, a network of canals, dikes, and reservoirs that could make modern water engineers nod in appreciation. With this system, they controlled the life-giving water, turning what could have been a desert wasteland into the Fertile Crescent. This wasn't just irrigation. It was the ancient version of water management on a scale that would make even the most seasoned civil engineer break into applause. These advances in agriculture did more than just fill bellies. They fueled the growth of cities like Uruk, and Eridu, transforming them from sleepy settlements into bustling metropolises. With more food came more people, and with more people came the need for organization. So, the Sumerians rolled up their sleeves and got to work on building the first urban society. And here's the ironic twist. By solving the problem of food scarcity, they created a new problem: how to manage all these people living in close quarters without everyone losing their minds. Economically, these agricultural advancements were like pouring rocket fuel on a bonfire. More food meant surplus, and surplus meant trade. Sumerians were trading grain, textiles, and pottery for metals, stones, and other exotic goods. They were the original globalization pioneers, setting up trade routes that stretched as far as Anatolia and the Indus Valley. This exchange of goods wasn't just about commerce. It was about cultural exchange. Ideas, beliefs, and technologies spread along these routes, influencing civilizations far beyond the Sumerian borders. But let's not get too carried away with the notion that everything was just peaky in Sumeria. The reality was as gritty as the mud bricks they used to build their cities. With urban growth came the inevitable class divisions. You had the elites, priests, kings, and the wealthy, living in grandiose homes, while the common folk lived in more modest conditions. The rise of cities also meant the rise of bureaucracy, with scribes keeping track of everything from grain harvests to taxation. Yes, taxes were a thing even in ancient Sumeria. The more things change, the more they stay the same, right? Sumeria's urban society didn't just pop up overnight. It was the result of centuries of innovation and adaptation. But by laying down the blueprints for urban living, they set in motion a chain of events that would shape the future of human civilization. The Sumerians showed us that with a little ingenuity, some back-breaking labor, and a lot of mud, you could build something that lasts. They were the original city planners, and their legacy is still with us today, whether we're willing to admit it or not. So, the next time you're stuck in traffic, just remember, it all started with a plow and a few good ideas. As the dust settled from the proverbial plow, Sumerian society was already knee-deep in the muddy waters of organization, a task as daunting and unavoidable as a Monday morning commute. The Sumerians, never ones for half measures, were not just about building physical structures. They were constructing a social edifice as intricate as their ziggurats were tall. At the top of this human pyramid sat the priest-kings, rulers of both the spiritual and temporal realms. Talk about wearing multiple hats, or in this case, crowns. Now, let's talk about these city-states, the real stars of the Sumerian show. Picture Uruk and as the ancient world's New York and Los Angeles, minus the skyscrapers and Hollywood, but with just as much drama. Uruk, often credited as the first true city in the world, was a sprawling metropolis by ancient standards, boasting around 50,000 inhabitants by 2900 BCE. That's like squeezing the population of a small modern city into an area where sanitation was still a work in progress. Not wanting to be outdone, was the birthplace of none other than Abraham of biblical fame, and was a hub for trade and culture. These city-states weren't just geographical entities. They were independent political units with their own governments, economies, and of course, rivalries. Imagine a city council meeting where the stakes are life and death, and you'll start to get the picture. Their governance was a theocratic affair, with priest-kings at the helm. These rulers were considered divine intermediaries, the ancient equivalent of having your mayor also serve as your spiritual guide. The priest-kings wielded immense power, controlling both the spiritual and economic lifeblood of the city. They were the original multitaskers, keeping one eye on the heavens and the other on the granaries. Now, before you start thinking these priest-kings were all about peace and love. Let's clear up that misconception. The Sumerians were nothing if not practical, and their rulers knew that spiritual authority was only as good as the army backing it. So, they maintained a well-organized military, with chariots and infantry ready to defend or expand their borders at a moment's notice. The priest-kings were also adept at diplomacy, marrying off daughters or negotiating alliances to keep the peace, or at least delay the next war. With power consolidated in the hands of a few, the rest of Sumerian society was a colorful tapestry of classes. At the top, you had the nobles and wealthy merchants, living in luxurious homes that would make a modern real estate agent salivate. Below them were the artisans and craftsmen, the backbone of the economy, creating everything from pottery to intricate jewelry. And then there were the farmers and laborers, the unsung heroes who toiled in the fields and built those famous mud brick structures. Now, let's dive into the murky waters of Sumerian bureaucracy. It was as labyrinthine as the city's streets, with scribes and officials keeping detailed records on clay tablets, the world's first spreadsheets, if you will. The Sumerians loved a good list, and they documented everything: transactions, inventories, and yes, taxes. The concept of taxation, much like a persistent cold, has plagued humanity for millennia. The Sumerians taxed everything from crops to livestock, showing that even in antiquity, nothing was certain except death and taxes. In terms of absurdity, Sumerian bureaucracy could give any modern government a run for its money. Imagine trying to navigate a system where every transaction required a clay tablet and a scribe who knew cuneiform, the ancient equivalent of trying to decode a QR code with a flip phone. Yet, for all its complexity, this system laid the groundwork for future civilizations. It was like a beta version of government, with all the bugs and updates that come with it. The Sumerians were also pioneers in the art of diplomacy, often using marriage as a tool to forge alliances between city-states. This was a Game of Thrones long before George R.R. Martin picked up a pen. The priest-kings understood that, while armies could conquer, marriages could unite. They were shrewd strategists, balancing the scales of power with the precision of a master jeweler crafting a delicate necklace. While we're on the subject of alliances, let's talk about trade. The Sumerians were savvy merchants, establishing trade routes that stretched from Anatolia to the Indus Valley. They traded everything from grain and textiles to precious metals and stones. This wasn't just about exchanging goods. It was a cultural exchange that spread ideas and technologies across vast distances. The Sumerians were the original influencers, their innovations spreading like viral memes across the ancient world. But let's not romanticize this too much. Life in Sumer was as brutal as it was brilliant. The inequalities that came with urbanization were stark. While the elites lived in relative luxury, the common folk had to make do with much less. The gap between the haves and the have-nots was as wide as the Euphrates itself. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, Sumerian society was dynamic and resilient, constantly adapting to new challenges. Sumerian law was another fascinating aspect of their civilization. Hammurabi might be the poster child for ancient legal codes, but the Sumerians were laying down the law centuries before his time. They developed one of the earliest known law codes, which might not have been as detailed as Hammurabi's, but served its purpose in maintaining order in their complex society. It was a system that blended justice with practicality, ensuring that everyone knew their place in the social hierarchy. The Sumerians also had a unique approach to punishment. Their legal system was based on the principle of retribution, which could make even the most hardened modern lawyer wince. Instead of fines, many offenses were met with physical punishment or even death. It was a stark reminder that while the Sumerians were advanced for their time, their justice system was as harsh as the desert sun. As we wrap up this part of our journey through ancient Sumer, it's clear that this civilization was as complex as it was groundbreaking. From the dizzying heights of their ziggurats to the depths of their bureaucratic clay tablets, the Sumerians laid the foundations for much of what we consider civilization today. Yet, for all their achievements, they were still very much human, grappling with the same challenges and absurdities that we face in our own society. So, as we continue to explore the legacy of Sumer, let's keep in mind that while the names and faces have changed, the essence of human civilization remains surprisingly familiar. Whether it's navigating the complexities of government or dealing with the inevitability of taxes, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And that's the real magic of history. It's a story that never truly ends, just as our exploration of Sumer is far from over. Stay tuned, because there's plenty more to dig into. And as always, the past has a way of surprising us with its relevance. Just as we're poised to dive deeper into the labyrinth of Sumerian society, let's pause to admire one of their most enduring legacies, cuneiform writing. This was no casual doodling in the sand, my friends. Imagine inventing a system so revolutionary that it would outlast empires and echo through the ages like the original tweet gone viral. Around 3200 BCE, the Sumerians took a leap from mere survivalists to record keepers extraordinaire. They created cuneiform, a system of wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay tablets. It was the prehistoric equivalent of the cloud, but with a lot more elbow grease and no chance of running out of storage. Cuneiform wasn't just a novelty for scribes eager to show off their stylist skills. This was a game-changer for record-keeping and literature. Picture it: contracts, transactions, laws, every little detail of life meticulously preserved in clay. Without cuneiform, we'd be as clueless about the Sumerians as a cat is about quantum physics. The birth of writing was like switching on a light in a dark room, illuminating the inner workings of a civilization that could otherwise be lost to time. And let's not forget literature. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the earliest known works of literary fiction, was etched in cuneiform. This tale of heroism and hubris shows us that even ancient kings had their midlife crises. But before you start imagining a world full of poetic scribes and philosopher kings, let's cut through the romance. The real driver behind this innovation was practicality, not artistic whimsy. Sumerians needed to manage their bustling cities and burgeoning economies. Keeping track of grain stores, tax records, and trade agreements was as essential as knowing which goat belonged to whom. Cuneiform was born out of necessity, a tool to handle the complexities of urban life, not just a means to pen love sonnets. While we're busting myths, let's tackle another one. The idea that Sumerians were mathematical savants gazing at the stars out of sheer intellectual curiosity. Sure, they made incredible strides in mathematics and astronomy, but their motivations were grounded in the gritty realities of life. Enter the base 60 number system, a mathematical marvel that's still with us today every time you glance at a clock or a compass. Why base 60, you ask? Well, it's divisible by a whole host of numbers, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which made it incredibly versatile for trade, construction, and dividing up fields. Forget romantic notions of the Sumerians sitting around pondering the mysteries of the universe. They were more likely figuring out how many bricks they needed for the next ziggurat. Astronomy was another area where the Sumerians shone like a bright star in the Mesopotamian night. Their observations led to the development of the lunar calendar, cycle that kept their agricultural activities in sync with the celestial dance. It wasn't just about gazing at the night sky in awe. It was about knowing when to plant crops or hold religious festivals without the help of Google Calendar. They divided the year into 12 lunar months, which required the occasional leap month to keep things aligned, a bit like the universe's way of saying, time to hit refresh. The Sumerians' fascination with the heavens wasn't just scientific, it was deeply entwined with their spirituality. They believed the movements of celestial bodies were the whims of the gods, and deciphering these patterns was akin to reading divine tea leaves. In a world where the gods could make or break your harvest, getting on their good side was paramount. But let's not sugarcoat it. This wasn't pure intellectual curiosity. It was a practical necessity wrapped in a cloak of divine reverence, a way to hedge their bets in an unpredictable world. Speaking of unpredictability, let's not forget the harsh realities that tempered Sumerian innovation. This was a civilization where every advancement came with a price. Their complex society required a level of organization that could rival any modern corporation's bureaucracy. Scribes were like ancient office clerks, painstakingly documenting every transaction on clay tablets. It was a system as efficient as it was cumbersome, a reminder that progress often walks hand in hand with complexity. While the Sumerians were busy laying the groundwork for future civilizations, they also left us with a legacy of contradictions. Their achievements were as much about survival as they were about glory. Cuneiform, mathematics, and astronomy were tools forged in the furnace of necessity, shaped by the demands of a society that was as fragile as it was formidable. They remind us that human ingenuity is often born from the need to solve problems, not just the desire to create beauty. As we look back on the Sumerians' cultural achievements, it's clear that they were pioneers in more ways than one. They didn't just invent writing, they created the blueprint for organized society. They didn't merely study the stars, they charted a course for future generations to follow. Yet for all their brilliance, they were bound by the same forces that shape us today: necessity, ambition, and the relentless march of time. As we close this chapter, remember that while the Sumerian story is ancient, its themes are timeless. Their achievements remind us that civilization is a delicate balance of creativity and practicality, a dance between the stars and the soil. Our journey through Sumer is far from over, so stay tuned as we continue to unravel the mysteries of this ancient land, where each discovery is a step closer to understanding the roots of our own modern world. The past may be a distant echo, but its lessons are as relevant as ever, and there's plenty more to explore on our journey through the cradle of civilization. And just when you thought the Sumerians had enough on their plate with inventing writing and number systems, they decided to tackle religion. Now, Sumerian religion wasn't just a Sunday hobby. It was a full-time, 24/7 affair complete, with guards who could throw celestial temper tantrums that made Zeus look like a mild-mannered accountant. The Sumerians had more guards than a polytheistic pop concert, each with a distinct role and a penchant for meddling in human affairs. Let's start with An, the sky god, who was basically the CEO of the Sumerian pantheon. He didn't get his hands dirty with the day-to-day operations. That was left to his underlings. But he was the one you wanted on your side when things got dicey. Then there was Enlil, the god of air and wind, who had the power to either nurture crops with a gentle breeze or flatten them with a storm. Talk about mixed messages. And let's not forget Inanna, the goddess of love and war, proving that even in ancient times, those two were inseparably linked. These deities weren't just for show. They were woven into the very fabric of Sumerian society, setting the moral and ethical standards that governed everyday life. Think of them as the original influencers, dictating fashion trends, agricultural practices, and even relationship advice. Their narratives were like ancient soap operas, filled with drama, betrayal, and the occasional flood to keep things interesting. Now, speaking of floods, let's dive into the epic of Gilgamesh, a tale so grand it makes Homer's epics look like bedtime stories. This literary masterpiece, etched into clay tablets, chronicles the adventures of Gilgamesh, the semi-mythical king of Uruk, who was 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, an interesting math problem, to say the least. The story kicks off with Gilgamesh being a bit of a tyrant, prompting the guards to send Enkidu, a wild man, to keep him in check. It's the ultimate buddy story, with a dash of existential angst. As Gilgamesh and Enkidu tackle monsters, guards, and the occasional existential crisis, the narrative serves up more than just entertainment. It's a window into the Sumerian psyche, exploring themes of friendship, mortality, and the quest for immortality. Gilgamesh's journey to find eternal life, only to discover that he's as mortal as the next guy, is a poignant reminder that some things, like taxes and death, are universal constants. And speaking of floods, the epic includes a deluge narrative eerily similar to the story of Noah, showing how myths have a way of transcending cultures and epochs. But let's not get too swept away by the romance of epic poetry. The Epic of Gilgamesh functioned as ancient PR, glorifying the king of Uruk, and by extension, the ruling elite. It was a way to justify the social hierarchy, with Gilgamesh's divine lineage serving as a divine endorsement of his rule. It was a classic case of history written by the victors, or in this case, the scribes who knew their clay tablets from their elbow. The Sumerian myths and religious beliefs were more than just bedtime stories for the ancient Mesopotamians. They were the blueprints for societal norms and values. The guards were not distant figures, but active participants in everyday life, their whims as unpredictable as the tigress in flood season. Rituals and offerings were crucial to keeping these celestial beings appeased, and temples were the epicenters of both spiritual and economic activity. These ziggurats, part temple, part government office, were where divine and earthly matters intertwined. Sumerian religion also served as a means of social control, a divine justification for the status quo. The priest-kings didn't just claim to rule by divine right. They acted as earthly representatives of the gods, ensuring that society ran according to celestial plans. This wasn't just about maintaining power. It was about weaving a belief system that kept the wheels of Sumerian society turning. After all, when your leader claims to have a direct line to the divine, questioning authority becomes a risky business. Let's pause to appreciate the practical side of Sumerian religion. This wasn't just about worshipping at the altar of abstract deities. It was a well-oiled machine that supported the economic and social structure. Temples owned vast tracts of land, managed agricultural production, and even engaged in trade. They were like ancient corporations, with priests acting as CEOs managing both spiritual and economic portfolios. The gods were shareholders in the truest sense, and keeping them happy was akin to maintaining a lucrative stock portfolio. But let's not sugarcoat it. Despite their divine affiliations, Sumerian priest-kings faced the same challenges that any leader would, keeping the populace in line, dealing with the occasional rebellion, and ensuring that the grain stores were full. In a society where divine favor was as fleeting as a Mesopotamian breeze, the stakes were high, and the consequences of failure could be catastrophic. In dissecting the Sumerian religion, we see a reflection of ourselves, a civilization grappling with the mysteries of existence, the whims of nature, and the complexities of human society. The myths and legends offer us a glimpse into a world where gods walked among men, where divine and earthly realms were inextricably linked. It's a testament to the Sumerians' enduring legacy that these stories still resonate today, offering insights into the human condition that are as relevant now as they were thousands of years ago. As we wrap up this exploration of Sumerian religious beliefs, it's clear that these ancient narratives were more than just myths. They were the foundation upon which the Sumerians built their civilization. They provided a framework for understanding the world, a moral compass for navigating life's challenges, and a justification for the social order. And while the gods of Sumer may no longer hold sway over our modern lives, their stories continue to captivate our imagination, reminding us that the quest for meaning is as timeless as the Sumerians themselves. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the mysteries of this ancient civilization, where each discovery brings us closer to understanding the roots of our own modern world. The past may be a distant echo, but its lessons are as relevant as ever, and there's plenty more to explore on our journey through the cradle of civilization. As we continue our jaunt through Sumerian history, remember that their story is more than a dusty artifact of the past. It's a mirror reflecting the complexities of our present. The Sumerians were the first to wrestle with the challenges of urban living, laying the groundwork for the civilizations that followed. Like an ancient relay race, they handed off the baton of innovation to the Akkadians, Babylonians, and beyond. But this wasn't just a matter of passing down a list of how-tos. The Sumerians left a legacy of ingenuity, adaptability, and yes, a fair share of cautionary tales. Take the written word, for example. Cuneiform was the Sumerians' brainchild, but its influence didn't stop at the Tigris and Euphrates. This system spread like wildfire, evolving into the various scripts that would eventually give rise to the alphabets we use today. Imagine teaching a modern-day teenager that their emojis owe a debt to some ancient scribe hunched over a clay tablet. The connection between Sumerian scribes and our digital shorthand may seem tenuous, but it's there. Proof that once humans figure out a way to communicate, they rarely let it go. And let's not forget the Sumerians' pioneering efforts in governance. Their city-states, each ruled by a priest-king, were the prototypes for later political systems. The concept of a centralized authority, coupled with a bureaucratic machine to manage the masses, was a Sumerian innovation. Sound familiar? Modern governments can trace their roots back to these early attempts at organization. While today's politician might not claim direct divine lineage, the echoes of Sumerian governance still reverberate in our halls of power. But the Sumerian civilization wasn't just about grand achievements and legacies that make history nerds giddy. It was also about the gritty realities of survival. Picture this. Around 2000 BCE, Sumer faced a double whammy of environmental and political upheaval. The climate turned on them like a fair-weather friend, with a series of droughts that made their once bountiful fields as barren as a desert Instagram influencer's fridge. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience, it was a full-blown crisis. Crops failed, food became scarce, and the social fabric began to fray. Sound eerily familiar. It's a reminder that environmental challenges have been a constant thorn in humanity's side. And as if Mother Nature's tantrum wasn't enough, enter stage left. The Amorites and the Elamites, each with their own agendas and a taste for conquest. These invasions chipped away at Sumerian stability, like termites gnawing at the foundations of their meticulously built society. The Sumerians, once the architects of urban life, found themselves struggling to keep the walls from caving in. It's a scenario as old as time, external pressures exposing the cracks in a once mighty civilization. Yet for all its drama, the fall of Sumer is not just a tale of doom and gloom. It's a narrative of resilience and reinvention. Even as their political structures crumbled, the cultural and technological innovations of the Sumerians lived on, absorbed and adapted by those who followed. The Babylonians took Sumerian achievements and ran with them, creating an empire that would dominate the ancient world. The wheel kept turning, literally and metaphorically, as each generation built upon the foundations laid by the Sumerians. In this way, the Sumerian story is as much a testament to human ingenuity as it is a cautionary tale. Their rise and fall remind us that civilization is a delicate balance, one that requires constant adaptation to survive. The Sumerians were the first to face the challenges of urbanization, environmental change, and external threats, a trifecta that still plagues modern society. We may have swapped mud bricks for skyscrapers and cuneiform for keyboards, but the underlying dynamics remain strikingly similar. So, what should we take away from our jaunt through Sumerian history? For one, it's a reminder that human innovation is often born from necessity. Sumerians didn't invent the plow, the wheel, or riding because they were bored. They did it to solve real-world problems. As we face our own contemporary challenges, from climate change to political instability, the lessons of Sumer offer a blueprint for resilience and adaptability. But perhaps the greatest takeaway is the reminder of our shared humanity. Across millennia, the Sumerians grappled with the same issues that occupy our headlines today: resource scarcity, social inequality, and the unpredictability of nature. Their story is a poignant reminder that while the specifics may change, the human condition remains remarkably consistent. In the end, the Sumerian civilization is both a cautionary tale and a testament to human ingenuity. It's a story of triumphs and tribulations, of innovation and adaptation. The Sumerians may have faded into the annals of history, but their legacy lives on, woven into the very fabric of our modern world. And as we continue to write our own history, we do well to remember the lessons of Sumer. That civilization is a delicate dance, one that requires both creativity and resilience to keep the music playing. So, as you close this chapter and ponder the wonders of ancient Sumer, remember that their story is far from over. It lives on in the words we write, the cities we build, and the challenges we face. History, after all, is not just about the past. It's a guidebook for the future, a reminder that while the names and faces may change, the essence of humanity remains the same. In the swirling sands of ancient Egypt, where the Nile slithered like a life-giving serpent, the gods were the ultimate rock stars. Forget the latest TikTok influencer or Instagram guru. These deities had a fan base that stretched across centuries. People didn't just follow them. They built colossal monuments, dedicated entire cities, and crafted elaborate myths that could rival any Hollywood blockbuster. So, who were these celestial beings that captured the hearts of an entire civilization? Let's dive into the divine drama of the Egyptian pantheon, starting with the big players, Ra, Osiris, and Isis. Ra, the sun god, was the ultimate beacon of celestial power. Imagine the sun, blazing, omnipresent, and quite literally the center of the universe for the Egyptians. Ra was your quintessential A-lister, cruising across the sky in his sun barge, fending off the chaos serpent Apep daily, and ensuring the world didn't spiral into darkness. Talk about a job with high stakes. Ra's influence was so pervasive that even pharaohs, who were already in the VIP lounge of society, aligned themselves with him to boost their own divine cred. We're talking about perks like immortality and cosmic legitimacy. No wonder Ra was as popular as he was. Osiris, on the other hand, brought a different vibe to the table. As the guard of the afterlife, he was less about basking in the sun and more about ensuring your post-mortem journey was on point. Think of Osiris as the cosmic gatekeeper, the one you'd want to impress at the ultimate final exam, the weighing of the heart. Not only did he rule the underworld, but he also symbolized resurrection and renewal, which was a pretty big deal in a land where death was just another phase of life. His own myth of death and rebirth, chopped into pieces by his jealous brother Set, and then reassembled by his devoted wife, Isis, was the original soap opera, blending betrayal, love, and a touch of necromancy. And then there was Isis, the divine multitasker. She wasn't just Osiris's wife. She was also a mother, a healer, and a magician extraordinaire. Her reputation for protection and magic made her the goddess for those in need of a little celestial intervention. Isis was the embodiment of loyalty and cunning, with a sprinkle of divine charm that made her irresistible. She was the original Wonder Woman, handling crises both in the realm of mortals and among the gods with unmatched grace. Her magic wasn't just for show. It was pivotal in resurrecting Osiris and in raising their son, Horus, to challenge Set's tyranny. Isis, quite literally, was the glue holding the divine family together. Now, you might be thinking, why were these gods so popular? Well, in a world where life was as unpredictable as the annual flooding of the Nile, having a divine squad in your corner was essential. The gods weren't just distant beings inhabiting the heavens. They were integral to the Egyptians' daily lives, rituals, and even their economy. Temples weren't just places of worship. They were bustling centers of activity, wealth, and power. The Temple of Karnak, dedicated to Amun-Ra, stretched over 200 acres and employed thousands, acting as a spiritual and economic hub. Worship wasn't just a spiritual practice. It was a way of life, deeply intertwined with the social and political fabric of the time. But let's not get too carried away by the grandeur of it all. While the gods were portrayed as benevolent protectors, they weren't always the kind-hearted deities of bedtime stories. The myths often reveal a more complex, and sometimes darker, side. Take Ra's bloody purge of humanity when they conspired against him, or Set's murderous ambition leading to fratricide. These tales reflect a world where power struggles and cosmic chaos were as real as the sand on the desert floor. The divine wasn't just about light and order. It was also about navigating the murky waters of chaos and conflict. In the end, the Egyptian gods were many things: mysterious, powerful, and at times merciless. They were the divine influencers of their age, shaping the lives and afterlives of their followers with a celestial mix of fear, reverence, and awe. As we dig deeper into their stories and symbols, we'll find that their appeal wasn't just in their legends, but in the very real impact they had on the world they ruled from above. So, stay tuned as we continue to unravel the mysteries of these ancient deities and the civilization that worshipped them with such fervor. As we pivot from the celestial to the terrestrial, let's wander through the monumental corridors of ancient Egyptian temples where the divine and the human worlds collided. These architectural wonders weren't just places to toss up a prayer. They were the beating heart of societal and economic life, akin to Wall Street with a side of incense. The temples of Karnak and Luxor, in particular, were not merely stone and shadow, but vibrant hubs pulsing with activity, wealth, and power. Karnak, stretching over 200 acres, was the ancient world's equivalent of a megachurch, corporate headquarters, and government office all rolled into one. Its sheer size is staggering, a veritable labyrinth of obelisks, columns, and sphinx-lined avenues. This wasn't just a pretty place to kneel and genuflect. It was an economic powerhouse. Imagine an operation that required thousands of workers, from priests to laborers to administrators, all bustling under the watchful eyes of Amun-Ra. The temple employed a small army, with some estimates suggesting that over 80,000 people were directly involved in its upkeep and function. That's a lot of paychecks to cut every month, even in temple script. Speaking of funds, let's talk about the economic engine behind these sacred structures. Temples were endowed with massive estates, sometimes owning up to a third of Egypt's arable land. They were agricultural giants, managing farms, herds, and fisheries. And we're not talking about a quaint community garden here. We're talking about agricultural operations that could feed armies. Revenue from these lands, along with offerings from worshippers, filled the temple coffers to bursting. With resources like these, it's no surprise that temples wielded considerable economic clout. So much so that pharaohs often had to tread carefully, ensuring they remained in the guards' good graces. And by guards, I mean the priests who served them. Which brings us to those priests. Now, if you're picturing serene figures in flowing robes, humming mantras as they drift through incense-laden sanctuaries, think again. Priests were more than spiritual guides. They were power brokers and administrators, the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a Fortune 500 CEO. These guys had the divine heartline, sure, but they also had a tight grip on temple assets and political influence. They were as much about spreadsheets as they were about spiritual chants. And let's not forget the bling. Their headgear was indeed funky, often adorned with symbols of their deity and authority, adding a bit of flair to the day-to-day grind of temple management. But why the elaborate rituals and extravagant architecture? It wasn't just about wooing the guards with grand gestures or keeping the locals in line with a bit of awe and wonder. Temples were designed to mirror the cosmos, a microcosm of the universe where order triumphed over chaos. Every column, every relief, every hieroglyph was a testament to Ma'at, the divine order. And maintaining this order wasn't just a religious duty, it was a political necessity. A well-run temple meant a stable cosmos, which in turn meant a stable kingdom. Now, let's debunk a few myths while we're at it. The image of priests as purely pious individuals devoted solely to the gods is as much a romantic notion as the idea that pyramids were built by aliens. Priests were savvy operators, deeply enmeshed in the machinations of power. Their influence extended far beyond the temple walls, often spilling into the political arena. They were kingmakers, economic powerhouses, and occasionally the string pullers behind the pharaoh's throne. So, was it all sacred reverence and piety? Not exactly. Temples were also stages for human drama, rife with power struggles, intrigue, and the occasional scandal. Think of them as the original soap operas, where divine service sometimes took a backseat to human ambition. The priests weren't just managing divine affairs. They were navigating a complex web of politics, economics, and social hierarchies. It was as much about earthly power as it was about heavenly devotion. As we explore these ancient precincts, it's clear that the line between the sacred and the mundane was as blurred as the horizon on a hot desert day. Temples were not just the domain of gods but of men, a testament to the intricate dance between divine aspiration and human ambition. In the grand tapestry of ancient Egypt, they were the threads that wove together the celestial and the terrestrial, the spiritual and the economic. So, while the gods loomed large over Egypt, it was in the temples that the real magic happened, a magic powered by stone and sweat, by faith and finance. As we continue our exploration, we'll delve deeper into the lives of those who served these sacred spaces, uncovering the complex interplay of religion, economics, and politics that defined an ancient civilization. Stay tuned as we unravel more mysteries from the sands of time. As we continue our journey through the wondrous yet gritty landscape of ancient Egyptian religious practices, let's now yank the veil off the rituals and ceremonies that made the ancient Nile civilization tick. Imagine you're an ancient Egyptian, and it's time to prepare for the afterlife. But wait, before you can kick back in eternity, there's the small matter of mummification. This wasn't just a hobby for the afterlife enthusiast. It was a full-scale operation. Let's talk logistics, shall we? Mummification wasn't just about drying out a body like beef jerky in the desert sun. It required a staggering amount of resources. For starters, we're talking about linen, loads and loads of it. Some estimates suggest that a single mummified body could be wrapped in up to 375 square meters of linen. That's enough to upholster a small fleet of chariots. And where there's linen, there's an industry. You could say that mummification was the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a stimulus package for the textile sector. It kept weavers and merchants busy, providing a steady flow of jobs and economic activity. But linen was just the beginning. The embalming process involved a veritable chemistry set of natron, a naturally occurring salt, resins, and oils, all of which had to be sourced, traded, and meticulously applied. And let's not forget the artisans, those skilled workers who crafted the elaborate sarcophagi, and the painters who adorned them with protective spells and vibrant scenes from the deceased's life. The entire process could take up to 70 days, and it was a full-blown production, complete with a team of embalmers, artisans, and priests. This was no small expense. It was an investment in eternity. But why go through all this trouble? Why not just, well, bury folks and be done with it? In the Egyptian belief system, preserving the body was crucial for the soul's journey in the afterlife. The physical form was considered a vessel necessary for the soul, specifically the ka, to recognize and reunite with. Without a preserved body, the soul might wander aimlessly, a terrifying prospect for the ancient mind. This blend of spiritual insurance and economic enterprise ensured mummification's place at the heart of Egyptian burial practices. Now, onto the festivals, those grand celebrations that brought the divine into the realm of the living. Festivals were the original block parties, complete with feasting, music, and enough booze to make a frat house blush. One of the grandest was the Arpit Festival, a yearly celebration that saw the god Amun-Ra travel from Karnak to Luxor in a ceremonial bark. This wasn't just a divine joyride, it was a political and social spectacle. The pharaoh would often participate, reinforcing his divine connection and legitimacy to rule. Thousands would gather to witness the procession, a vibrant mix of piety and revelry. And let's be honest, who wouldn't want to take a break from the daily grind to celebrate with the gods? These festivals were not just about pleasing the deities, they were economic boons as well. Vendors, craftsmen, and performers would converge, turning them into bustling markets of trade and culture. In a society where religion was deeply intertwined with everyday life, festivals were both spiritual observances and opportunities for economic exchange. They were the ancient world's version of a Renaissance fair, minus the turkey legs, but with far more divine gravitas. And speaking of the divine, let's clear the air about the Book of the Dead. This wasn't a singular ancient manuscript unearthed from a dusty tomb. Instead, it was a collection of spells, a sort of choose-your-own-adventure for the dead, guiding them through the perils of the underworld. Forget the idea of a neatly compiled book. This was more of a bespoke operation. Each version was customized for the deceased, tailored to their needs and status. It was more like an ancient self-help book crossed with a survival manual, offering advice on overcoming demons and passing the infamous weighing of the heart. But here's the kicker. Only those who could afford it had full access to these spells. In a society where the afterlife was the ultimate destination, having a personalized guidebook was the VIP ticket. The more elaborate your Book of the Dead, the more prepared you were for the afterlife's challenges, was the ancient equivalent of cramming for the most important exam of your existence. So, while some might dreamily imagine the book as a mystical tome, the reality was grounded in the practicalities of wealth and social standing. These rituals and ceremonies were not just spiritual exercises, they were deeply embedded in the economic and social fabric of ancient Egypt. They were where the sacred and the secular met, where divine intentions intersected with earthly realities. And as we peel back the layers of these practices, we're left with a culture that was as much about the afterlife as it was about the here and now. A civilization that invested in the eternal, with a keen eye on the practicalities of the present. In the end, whether it was the meticulous art of mummification or the boisterous celebrations of the gods, these traditions were a testament to the Egyptians' profound belief in the afterlife and the lengths they would go to ensure a smooth transition to eternity. While we might chuckle at the idea of linen-wrapped bodies and elaborate spells as entry tickets to paradise, for the ancient Egyptians it was the ultimate life hack, one that spanned this world and the next. As we continue to unravel their stories, we'll find that their practices weren't just about myth and mystery, but about a pragmatic approach to the cosmic journey. So, hang tight as we delve further into the enigmatic rituals that defined a civilization and continue to captivate our imaginations. Now, as we stand on the edge of the afterlife, preparing to dive into the political quagmire of ancient Egypt, let's talk pharaohs. These guys weren't just swanning around in gold sandals, lounging by the Nile. Nope, they were the ultimate CEOs of a sprawling empire, wielding both the crook of divine authority and the flail of political acumen. So, were they truly chosen by the gods, or just the most ruthless player in the ancient real-life Game of Thrones? Let's unravel this regal enigma. In ancient Egypt, political power and religion were as inseparable as tick-tock and dance challenges. Pharaohs claimed to be gods on earth, a status upgrade that came with perks like ruling a nation and having a direct line to the divine. But make no mistake, they weren't just basking in celestial glory. They were in the business of statecraft, using religion as a tool to legitimize their rule. And nothing says, "I'm in charge," quite like declaring yourself Horus incarnate, the living embodiment of a god. The pharaoh's divine image was carefully crafted propaganda, smoke and mirrors act that would make any modern PR team proud. Take Ramses Roman II, aka Ramses the Great. This guy didn't just build monuments. He built an image of himself as a warrior king, god, and master builder. And he had the receipts: over 200 wives and concubines, 96 sons, and 60 daughters. The dude was just as prolific in his personal life as he was on the battlefield. His reign was one of the longest in Egyptian history, clocking in a solid 66 years, making him the Mick Jagger of pharaohs, seemingly invincible and eternally in the limelight. Pharaohs wielded their divine status to reinforce social norms and hierarchies. In a world where the Nile's flood patterns could make or break your economy, convincing the masses that you controlled the divine order was quite the coup. This celestial endorsement wasn't just about keeping the people in line. It was about ensuring that the social pyramid, pun intended, remained intact, with the pharaoh at the top, priests just below, and everyone else scrambling for a decent spot in the hierarchy. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. Pharaohs were not universally loved. While the romantic image of a god-king doling out justice like a benevolent deity is tempting, the reality was more often a tale of political machinations and ruthless power plays. Consider Akhenaten, the heretic king who dared to shake up the divine order by introducing monotheism with the sun disk Aten at the center. His religious revolution was less about spiritual awakening and more about consolidating power, sidelining the powerful priesthood of Ammon. But like any good plot twist, it backfired spectacularly. After his death, the old gods made a comeback, and Akhenaten was scrubbed from history faster than a scandalous tweet. Speaking of priesthoods, these guys were no slouches in the power department. They were the IRS, the Fed, and the Vatican all rolled into one, collecting taxes, controlling vast tracts of land, and wielding power behind the throne. The high priests of Ammon, in particular, could make or break a pharaoh's rule. In some cases, they were the shadow rulers, pulling strings and ensuring that the god king stayed in line with divine will, which conveniently aligned with their own interests. The social hierarchy in Egypt was as rigid as a hieroglyphic carving. At the top, you had the pharaoh, the divine ruler. Below him, the priests and nobles, who were the administrative backbone of the empire. These guys were the original bureaucrats, managing everything from grain supplies to construction projects. Then came the scribes, the literate elite who kept the gears of the state turning with their mastery of hieroglyphs. And at the bottom, the farmers and laborers who toiled away in the fields and on construction sites, building the monumental legacies of the rulers above them. The truth is, while the pharaohs and priests were living it up, the average Egyptian was more concerned with whether the Nile would flood on time to ensure a good harvest. But let's debunk a bit of mythology here. The common belief is that Egyptian society was one big happy family, unified under the divine leadership of their pharaoh. In reality, the society was rife with class tension and economic disparities. The construction of the pyramids, for instance, was less about enslaved masses and more about a complex system of labor taxes and corvée labor, where citizens worked for the state in exchange for food and shelter. It was a barter system on an epic scale, and while it wasn't slavery in the traditional sense, it was far from a utopian commune. Now, let's throw a curveball into this divine narrative, the role of women in ancient Egyptian society. While they weren't exactly crashing through the glass ceiling, women in Egypt had more rights than their counterparts in many other ancient civilizations. They could own property, initiate divorce, and even rule as pharaohs in rare cases. Hats off to Hatshepsut, who ruled as pharaoh in her own right, darning the false beard of kingship and commissioning grand building projects. She was the Cleopatra of her age, wielding power with a deft touch that would have left many of her male predecessors in awe. Religion didn't just reinforce societal norms, it was the foundation of law and order. The concept of Maat, the goddess of truth and justice, was central to maintaining harmony in both the cosmos and society. Pharaohs were seen as the earthly enforcers of Maat, ensuring that everything from the annual inundation of the Nile to the behavior of their subjects, adhered to this divine order. But here's the kicker. While the ideal of Mart was upheld in grand proclamations, the practical application was often more about political expediency than divine justice. And let's not forget the economic engine that was ancient Egypt. The trade networks spanned from the Levant to sub-Saharan Africa, bringing in everything from cedar wood to gold. This wasn't just a kingdom of sand and stone. It was a bustling hub of commerce and culture. The economy was as much a part of the divine order as the gods themselves, with pharaohs overseeing vast agricultural estates and controlling trade routes. The granaries of Egypt were legendary, and during times of drought or famine, the pharaoh's ability to provide for his people was seen as a sign of his divine favor, or lack thereof. So, what do we make of these god kings and their golden rule? Were they divine beings, blessed by the deities, or savvy rulers exploiting religion for political gain? The answer, as with most things in history, is a bit of both. Pharaohs were masters of the divine PR game, using religion to bolster their power and control the narrative. But they were also astute politicians, navigating the treacherous waters of court intrigue and international diplomacy. As we peel back the layers of this ancient civilization, we find not just a tale of gods and gold, but a complex web of power, politics, and pragmatism. The pharaohs were more than just figureheads. They were the linchpins of a society that balanced cosmic order with earthly ambition. And while the pyramids stand as monumental testaments to their reigns, the real story of ancient Egypt lies in the interplay of divine authority and human ingenuity. Stay with us as we continue to unearth the secrets of this fascinating culture, exploring the legacies of its rulers and the lives of its people. There's more drama to uncover, more myths to debunk, and more mysteries to unravel as we journey through the sands of time. The adventure is just beginning, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. As we stand poised on the brink of Egypt's sprawling legacy, it's time to pull back the curtain on how this ancient civilization cast its long shadow over the future. You see, ancient Egypt wasn't just about pyramids and pharaohs. It was a cultural colossus whose influence rippled far beyond the Nile. First up, let's talk about how Egypt's religious practices found new homes in different lands. When the Greeks came knocking, led by that overachiever Alexander the Great in 332 BCE, they weren't just bringing olive oil and philosophers. They were blending their pantheon with local deities. The result, Serapis, a fusion of Egyptian and Greek gods, crowned with a modious grain measure atop his head, suggesting he was as much about feeding the people as feeding souls. The Greeks didn't just adopt Egyptian gods, they rebranded them, adding a sprinkle of Hellenistic flavor. This cultural cocktail wasn't just about divine allegiances. It was about creating bridges between peoples, enabling conquerors and conquered to find common ground in their shared deities. But the Egyptians weren't done leaving their mark. Fast forward to the Roman Empire, and you'll find Isis, the multitasking goddess, enjoying a second act. Her cult spread across the empire like wildfire, from the bustling streets of Rome to the far reaches of Britannia. Temples dedicated to Isis popped up everywhere, and her image adorned amulets, offering protection and a touch of mysticism to her followers. Why the allure? Isis symbolized rebirth and protection, themes that resonated with a Roman society obsessed with order and control. She was the ancient world's answer to a cultural icon, a divine figure that transcended borders and resonated with the masses. Of course, the legacy of Egyptian religion wasn't just confined to gods and temples. Their architectural prowess left an indelible mark, too. The grandiosity of Egyptian monuments inspired countless civilizations. The obelisks, with their skyward reach, were like ancient skyscrapers, symbols of power and continuity. Look no further than the Vatican's Pie and Pietro, where an Egyptian obelisk stands proudly, a reminder that the Romans, and later the Church, knew a good cultural appropriation when they saw one. This wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about claiming a piece of that ancient aura, tapping into Egypt's mystique to bolster their own prestige. Yet, as we wander through this romanticized history, let's not forget the gritty realities. The image of Egypt as a land of eternal wonder often glosses over the harsh truths. The pyramids, while awe-inspiring, were built on the backs of a labor force that toiled under the relentless sun. These weren't slaves in chains, as Hollywood might have us believe, but conscripted workers fulfilling labor taxes. Their sweat and toil turned visions into stone, yet they remain nameless, their stories overshadowed by the monuments they left behind. And those magnificent temples, they weren't just divine playgrounds. They were powerhouses of economic and political might. Behind the dazzling facade of spirituality lurked a complex web of control, where priests wielded influence with as much skill as any political operative. The temples were less about divine worship and more about maintaining the status quo, ensuring that power remained in the hands of a few elite. The romantic allure of Egypt often veils these gritty truths, turning a complex civilization into a land of mystery and magic. Yet, it's this very complexity that makes Egypt's legacy so enduring. We're drawn to the romance of it all, the gods, the grandeur, the golden sands. But it's the reality, the human stories of ambition, power, and struggle that keep us hooked. Egypt's history is a testament to the fact that the past is never as simple as it seems, and its lessons are as relevant today as they were thousands of years ago. In the end, Egypt's true legacy is its ability to captivate and challenge us. It reminds us that history is not just a series of grand narratives, but a tapestry of human experiences, each thread woven with intention and consequence. As we look back, let's do so with clear eyes, acknowledging the romance while embracing the reality. Because, much like the sands of the desert, the truth of Egypt is ever shifting, a mosaic of myth and fact that continues to inspire and intrigue. And as we leave this ancient world behind, let's carry its lessons with us. Because history, after all, is the greatest teacher of all, if only we choose to listen. As the first rays of sunlight sneak through your paper window screen, the day begins with a promise and a hint of chaos. Welcome to 14th century Nanjing, where you, a Ming Dynasty scholar, have the dubious honor of being the intellectual elite. The aroma of congee, a simple rice porridge that's been a staple for centuries, wafts from the kitchen, promising a warm start to the day. But don't get too comfy. Your breakfast might be humble, but the expectations riding on your scholarly shoulders are anything but. You might think that being a scholar in this era is all about wisdom and enlightenment. Well, surprise. It's also about memorizing over 400 000 characters from the Confucian classics. That's right. Your brain is basically an ancient hard drive for Confucius's greatest hits. And speaking of hits, pressure to ace the imperial exams is as intense as a modern-day college entrance frenzy, but with fewer cram schools and more bamboo slips. After breakfast, it's time to hit the streets of Nanjing. The city is buzzing, quite literally, with the clamor of merchants hawking their wares and the distinctive squeak of wooden carts bouncing over cobblestones. Nanjing isn't just the capital. It's a melting pot of ideas, cultures, and occasionally some questionable hygiene practices. As you weave through the crowd, you're acutely aware of your role in this bustling metropolis. You're not just a scholar. You're a walking embodiment of Confucian ideals, at least in theory. Your destination is the Imperial Academy, the pinnacle of your academic journey. Think of it as the Harvard of the Ming Dynasty, minus the hefty tuition fees, but with a much stricter dress code. Here, you're surrounded by fellow scholars, each one as dedicated or as stressed as you are. The academy is a testament to the state's commitment to Confucian education, a concept as central to Ming society as the Great Wall is to the landscape. Confucian philosophy is the bread and butter of your daily life, dictating everything from how you interact with your elders to how you govern your own thoughts. It's like having a 500-year-old life coach who insists on the virtues of filial piety and moral integrity. But let's not sugarcoat it. Sometimes the expectations are as absurd as they are lofty. You're expected to be a paragon of virtue, a master of rhetoric, and oh yes, memorize those thousands of texts we mentioned earlier. No pressure, right? As you stroll through the academy, you can't help but poke fun at the ridiculousness of it all. Imagine being so well-versed in Confucian texts that you could recite them backward while blindfolded. It's the kind of party trick that might impress your fellow scholars, but doesn't do much for your social life outside these walls. Despite the absurdities, you know that these texts are more than just words. They are the backbone of governance and social order in Ming China. The city streets are a vibrant tapestry of life, from the silk-robed officials to the street vendors shouting with the zeal of carnival barkers. As you navigate through the throng, you're reminded that beneath the bureaucratic layers and scholarly pretensions lies a city teeming with life, each person playing their part in the grand Ming mosaic. It's a reality check that even the most devoted scholar needs. Life isn't just about dusty scrolls and ancient wisdom. It's also about connection, commerce, and the occasional cup of tea. By the time the sun reaches its zenith, you've already exchanged polite greetings with numerous officials, each one sizing you up as a potential ally or rival. In the world of Ming scholars, social maneuvering is as important as intellectual prowess. You're not just sharpening your mind, you're also honing your ability to navigate the complex web of courtly politics. The irony isn't lost on you. While Confucius preaches humility, the academy can often feel like a theatrical performance where everyone's vying for the spotlight. As you settle into your studies, surrounded by ancient texts and the sound of quills scratching against parchment, you reflect on the duality of your existence. On one hand, you're a vessel of knowledge, tasked with preserving the teachings of the ancients. On the other, you're a cog in the vast machine that is the Ming bureaucracy. It's a delicate balance, one that requires constant reflection and occasionally a sense of humor to keep things in perspective. In this world, scholars are revered and ridiculed in equal measure. You're a symbol of wisdom, but also a reminder of the sometimes ludicrous lengths to which society will go to maintain tradition. The pressure to excel is immense, but so is the potential for impact. As you glance out the window, watching the city pulse with life, you're reminded that despite the challenges, being a scholar in the Ming Dynasty is a privilege, one that allows you to shape the very fabric of your world, one character at a time. But let's not get too philosophical just yet. The day is young, and there are scrolls to read, exams to prepare for, and maybe, just maybe, a moment to step back and appreciate the absurd beauty of it all. Because in the end, being a scholar isn't just about mastering the texts. It's about understanding the world they inhabit and finding your place within it, even if it means occasionally laughing at the ridiculousness of it all. But enough about the philosophical musings of a Ming scholar. Let's talk cold, hard cash. Or, as it was more likely, cold, slightly sticky rice. Welcome to the world of Ming Dynasty economics, where your scholarly skills might earn you prestige, but not necessarily a fat paycheck. So what's the deal with the scholar's salary? Imagine this. After years of poring over texts until your eyes cross, you finally snag a government post. Your reward, stipend that's about as modest as your breakfast. A typical scholar official might earn anywhere from 4 to 10 taels of silver per year. To give you some perspective, a tael is roughly 5 grams, or about the weight of that fancy smartphone in your pocket. Now, before you start imagining scholars living large, let's break down the cost of living. A pound of rice, the staple of any Ming diet, would set you back about 0.02 taels. Sounds cheap, right? But when you factor in all the other essentials, clothing, housing, maybe the occasional scroll for some light reading, those taels start to disappear faster than dumplings at a festival. Speaking of rice, a scholar's lunch was often as humble as it was predictable. Picture this, a simple bowl of rice, perhaps accompanied by some pickled vegetables if you're feeling fancy. It's a meal that's more about sustenance than satisfaction. But hey, at least it keeps you going through those endless hours of study. And if you're really lucky, you might even score a piece of pork fat. Talk about living the high life. The economy of the Ming Dynasty wasn't just about rice and silver, though. It was intricately tied to agriculture and trade, a vast web that connected peasants and scholars, merchants and emperors. Agriculture was the backbone, with rice and wheat fields spreading across the landscape like a patchwork quilt. These fields didn't just feed the nation. They fueled the engine of the economy, supporting a population that ballooned to over 160 million by the end of the dynasty. But agriculture was just one piece of the puzzle. Enter the Grand Canal, the superhighway of the Ming Dynasty. Stretching over 100 miles, this engineering marvel was the lifeline of the empire, connecting the fertile plains of the south with the hungry mouths of the north. It was a logistics operation that even modern supply chain managers would find impressive and probably a bit terrifying. Imagine trying to coordinate thousands of boats carrying grain, silk, and tea, all while dodging the occasional pirate attack. It was the ancient equivalent of navigating rush-hour traffic in a snowstorm. The Grand Canal didn't just transport goods, it transported careers. Many a scholar found their fortunes, or their failures, tied to this watery artery. Securing a post near the canal could mean access to valuable trade routes, not to mention a steady supply of gossip from the bustling port towns. But it also meant dealing with the constant threat of floods, not to mention the occasional political intrigue. It was a career path that required as much savvy as scholarship, a reminder that in the Ming Dynasty, intellect and influence often went hand in hand. Trade wasn't just an internal affair, though. The Ming Dynasty was a player on the global stage, its goods coveted from the Spice Islands to the shores of the Mediterranean. The legendary Silk Road, a network of routes stretching over 4,000 miles, was the conduit for this international commerce. It was a path fraught with danger, from bandits to blizzards, but for those who dared, it offered riches beyond imagination. Silk, porcelain, and tea, these were the treasures that flowed from the heart of China to the farthest reaches of the known world. And let's not forget the maritime trade routes, where fleets of Chinese junks sailed the high seas, laden with goods for distant ports. The treasure voyages, led by the legendary Admiral Zheng He, were the peak of Ming naval prowess. These expeditions ventured as far as Africa, showcasing the might and wealth of the Chinese Empire. It was a time when the world seemed limitless, a vast ocean waiting to be explored. But as grand as it sounds, it was also a logistical nightmare, with sailors battling storms and scurvy, all while keeping a wary eye out for hostile fleets. Of course, no discussion of Ming economics would be complete without acknowledging the darker side of this prosperity. Beneath the surface of trade and agriculture lay a system rife with inequality. While the elite dined on delicacies, the peasantry toiled in the fields, their lives dictated by the whims of weather and the demands of the state. It was a reality that even the most idyllic depictions of the era couldn't erase, a reminder that the grandeur of history often rests on the backs of the forgotten. And so, as the sun dips below the horizon, casting the city in hues of gold and shadow, you reflect on the complexity of the world you inhabit. It's a world where knowledge is power, but power is seldom evenly distributed, where the glories of empire are built on the toil of the many, and where the threads of commerce weave a tapestry as intricate as any scholar's scroll. But before you dive too deep into existential thoughts, there's still the matter of tomorrow's studies, the ever-present scrolls waiting to be unraveled. The journey of a Ming scholar is far from over, and there are lessons yet to learn, both in the texts and in the world that surrounds you. So, for now, you lay down your brush, take a final sip of tea, and prepare for another day in the life of a scholar in the Ming Dynasty, a life that is as demanding as it is rewarding, as filled with challenges as it is with opportunities. As the moonlight dances on the rooftops of Nanjing, you tuck away your thoughts of rice and trade, turning your mind to the labyrinth of Ming politics. It's a world where a scholar's pen can be mightier than a soldier's sword, but only if you can survive the treacherous dance of bureaucracy. Welcome to the political landscape of the Ming Dynasty, where every scholar dreams of climbing the ranks, yet many end up lost in the shuffle. Let's start with the civil service exams, the cornerstone of your scholarly ambitions and the stuff of legend, or nightmares, depending on who you ask. Imagine a test so grueling, even the SATs would blush. Over the course of 3 days, you're locked in a tiny cell, armed with nothing but ink, paper, and the weight of 1,000 Confucian principles. Your task, to regurgitate those 400,000 characters you've crammed into your brain, like some kind of ancient Google search engine. And if you think that sounds intense, consider this. Only about 1-2% of candidates made it through to the final stage. That's a success rate more elusive than a Ming Dynasty ghost story. But let's pause to consider the myth of meritocracy that these exams supposedly represent. Yes, in theory, anyone with enough brains and stamina could rise to the top. It's a nice story, isn't it? But in practice, the system was about as unbiased as a cat in a fish market. Money and connections often greased the wheels of success, with wealthy families hiring tutors that would make modern test prep companies drool. And let's not forget the ever-present shadow of corruption, where examiners could be bribed to misplace a rival's paper. Speaking of exams, let's peek at one of those infamous questions. Here's a gem. Discuss the significance of virtue in governance according to Confucius. Sounds straightforward, right? Except that your response must be a flawless essay laced with literary flair and allusions to classical texts. No pressure, though. You just have the future of your career riding on it. Once you manage to navigate this academic minefield, you're rewarded with a shiny new title and a position in the Ming bureaucracy. Cue the applause. Except, instead of a grandiose office, you find yourself in a cramped space, surrounded by scrolls and the constant hum of political maneuvering. Welcome to the world of scholar officials, where your job is to manage everything from tax collection to infrastructure repair, all while dodging the ever-present threat of political intrigue. In the Ming political arena, alliances shift faster than you can say Confucius. One minute you're the emperor's golden child, the next you're out of favor, exiled to the provinces faster than you can pack your ink stone. So how did some scholars thrive in this cutthroat environment? Well, a sharp mind helps, but so does a sharper tongue. Mastering the art of rhetoric was crucial, allowing you to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics with wit and cunning. Consider this. The Ming court was a theatrical circus, complete with its own ringmasters and performers. Every scholar was an actor on this grand stage, where the script was constantly rewritten by power plays and the whispers of eunuchs. Some scholars, like the infamous Liu Bowen, became legends for their ability to walk this tightrope. Known as the Sleeping Dragon, Liu was a master strategist, navigating the court's murky waters with the grace of a seasoned diplomat. His secret, a combination of brilliance and a knack for knowing when to keep his head down. Now, you might be wondering, was it all worth it? Did the prestige and power justify the stress and scheming? For many scholars, the answer was yes. Despite the challenges, the opportunity to influence imperial policy, to be part of something larger than oneself, was a siren call that few could resist. For every scholar who ascended the ranks, many more fell by the wayside, victims of the relentless pressure and the ever-present spectre of failure. As the night deepens, you ponder the duality of your existence, both a cog in the grand machinery of the Ming state and a keeper of its ancient wisdom. It's a delicate balance, one that requires constant vigilance and occasionally a wry sense of humor. After all, in a world where the pen is indeed mightier than the sword, it pays to keep your quill sharp and your wit sharper. Tomorrow, the cycle begins anew, with fresh challenges and the eternal quest for knowledge. But for now, you rest, content in the knowledge that as a Ming scholar, you are part of a legacy that spans millennia, a legacy that continues to shape the world, one character at a time. As you drift into sleep, the echoes of the past weave through your dreams, reminding you that history is not just a collection of dusty scrolls, but a living tapestry, rich with the stories of those who came before. As you drift into sleep, the echoes of the past weave through your dreams, reminding you that history is not just a collection of dusty scrolls, but a living tapestry, rich with the stories of those who came before. But just as the ink dries on the tales of political acrobatics, the afternoon beckons with a different rhythm. Step away from the bureaucratic chessboard and into the vibrant world of social and cultural life in 14th century Nanjing. Spoiler alert, it's a whirlwind of poetry, art, and enough social climbing to make a reality TV producer swoon. Now, let's shatter the myth of the solitary scholar, shall we? Scratch that image of a bespectacled intellectual brooding over scrolls in a dimly lit room. The truth. Scholars were social creatures, flitting about salons and tea-houses like intellectual butterflies, debating, networking, and occasionally gossiping with the enthusiasm of a modern-day influencer. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of LinkedIn, but with more poetry and fewer unsolicited business pitches. The afternoon is prime time for cultural mingling, where your scholarly robes double as a VIP pass into the elite circles of Nanjing. Imagine this. You're strolling down the bustling streets, a hive of activity where everyone, from merchants to magistrates, is eager to exchange news and ideas. Your reputation as a scholar isn't just a badge of honor. It's the key to unlocking doors to cultural gatherings where the air is thick with the scent of incense and the sound of lute strings. Now, let's talk about the social hierarchy. In Ming China, scholars sat comfortably near the top, just below the emperor and his retinue of officials. But don't be fooled by the romanticized notion of scholars as untouchable sages. In reality, you're one part philosopher, one part politician, and one part social strategist, constantly navigating a web of alliances and rivalries that would make a Game of Thrones plotline look like light reading. Your afternoons might include a visit to the home of a wealthy patron, where the talk is as rich as the decor. Here, art and academia collide in a glorious display of cultural one-upmanship. You might find yourself in the company of painters, calligraphers, and poets, each eager to share their latest masterpiece. And let's not forget the poetry contests, where quick wit and a sharp tongue can earn you accolades or a rival's enmity. The stakes are high in these verbal duels, where a well-placed metaphor can be as powerful as any political decree. But let's not get too starry-eyed. Beneath the surface of this cultural renaissance lies a more pragmatic motive: influence. Patronage is the currency of the realm, and your ability to charm a patron can mean the difference between a life of frugal introspection and one of relative ease. It's a delicate dance, where flattery meets finesse, and one misstep could see you sidelined faster than you can say Confucian classics. And while we're dispelling myths, let's address the notion that scholars were above the fray of everyday concerns. In truth, they were as human as the next person, prone to the same vices and virtues. Ming Dynasty scholars were known to indulge in the occasional extravagance, from lavish banquets to the finer things in life, like silk robes and rare teas. After all, what's the point of mastering the classics if you can't enjoy a little luxury now and then? Speaking of indulgence, let's dip into the world of Ming art, a kaleidoscope of creativity that was both a reflection of and a reaction to the socio-political climate. Scholars often dabbled in painting and calligraphy, wielding brushes with the same precision they applied to their studies. A well-crafted poem or a masterful brushstroke could convey complex ideas, serving as both personal expression and political commentary. In a world where words were powerful, art became a subtle yet potent weapon. Take, for example, the revered literati paintings, where landscapes were reimagined through the lens of philosophical inquiry. These weren't just pretty pictures. They were meditations on nature, humanity, and the cosmos, each brush stroke a dialogue between the artist and the world. And let's not forget calligraphy, the art form that transformed mere words into visual poetry. A scholar's ability to blend style with substance was a testament to their mastery, a skill as respected as their knowledge of the classics. Now, while your scholarly pursuits might earn you respect, they don't shield you from the complexities of social interaction. The salons and tea-houses are lively arenas where debates can be as heated as the tea itself. Here, you engage in discussions that range from the philosophical to the political, each conversation a chance to assert your ideas and expand your influence. It's a balancing act of intellect and diplomacy, where a well-timed quip can win you allies or enemies. But let's not romanticize the scholar's world too much. For all its cultural richness, it's a society defined by rigid structures and expectations. The Confucian ideal of harmony and hierarchy permeates every aspect of life, from the way you address your elders to the way you conduct yourself in public. It's a framework that offers stability but demands conformity, a reality that every scholar must navigate with care. As the afternoon sun casts long shadows over Nanjing, you find yourself reflecting on the duality of your existence. You're part of a tradition that values both introspection and interaction, a legacy that celebrates the power of the mind and the art of the heart. In a world that's as complex as it is captivating, you move with the grace of someone who knows that knowledge is both a privilege and a responsibility. And so, as the day draws to a close, you prepare to leave the bustling streets for the quieter confines of your study. The evening promises a return to the texts and the teachings, a chance to immerse yourself once more in the wisdom of the ancients. But for now, you savor the vibrant tapestry of life that surrounds you, a reminder that being a scholar is about more than memorizing texts. It's about engaging with the world, one conversation at a time. As you walk towards the setting sun, the city alive with the hum of voices and the scent of incense, you realize that the life of a Ming scholar is as dynamic as it is demanding. It's a journey that requires both intellect and empathy, a path that invites you to explore the depths of human experience. And while the road may be fraught with challenges, it's also rich with the promise of discovery, a promise that keeps you moving forward, one step, one scroll, one story at a time. As the sun dips below the horizon, the warm glow of candlelight begins to flicker in your study, casting shadows that dance across the walls like whispers of the past. It's here, amidst the quiet rustle of scrolls and the faint scent of ink, that the evening of a Ming scholar truly begins, a time for reflection, ambition, and perhaps a hint of existential dread about tomorrow's conundrums. The day's social whirl fades into the background, replaced by the comforting solitude of your scholarly sanctuary. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate the paradox of your position. As a scholar, you're both the guardian of age-old wisdom and a reluctant participant in the relentless march of progress. The Ming Dynasty, after all, is a time of significant change, a period when the foundations of Chinese society are being both reinforced and challenged. The empire is sprawling, with a population soaring past 160 million, and you're tasked with helping steer this colossal ship through the choppy waters of history. But let's not romanticize the notion of the scholar as an all-knowing sage. The truth is, you're just as likely to be grappling with self-doubt as you are with Confucian texts. Sure, you've mastered the classics, but how do you apply teachings written centuries ago to the ever-evolving challenges of your world? It's a bit like trying to use a scroll to fix a broken abacus. Sometimes the tools of the past don't quite fit the problems of the present. As you mull over these thoughts, your gaze drifts to the stack of scrolls awaiting your attention. They're more than just repositories of knowledge. They're a testament to the enduring legacy of Ming scholars. These texts form the backbone of Chinese intellectual life, influencing everything from governance to art. And while you might feel like a small cog in the grand machinery of history, the truth is, your work contributes to a legacy that extends far beyond your own lifetime. The influence of Ming scholarship isn't just confined to China, either. The empire's reach stretches across Asia and even into Europe, where tales of the great Middle Kingdom captivate the imaginations of traders and explorers. Think of it as the original viral content, spreading ideas faster than a merchant's ship can sail. It's a reminder that knowledge, once shared, has the power to transcend borders and shape civilizations. But let's not get too carried away with visions of grandeur. For every Ming scholar who becomes a household name, countless others toil in relative obscurity, their contributions perhaps destined to be footnotes in history. It's a humbling thought, one that underscores the dual nature of scholarly pursuit, both a quest for personal enlightenment and a commitment to the greater good. As the night deepens, you find yourself pondering the personal aspirations that drive you. Is it the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake, or the hope of leaving a mark on the world? Perhaps it's a bit of both. After all, ambition and altruism aren't mutually exclusive. They're two sides of the same coin, propelling you forward even when the path seems uncertain. And then there's the ever-present challenge of balancing tradition with innovation. The Ming Dynasty is a time of remarkable achievements, from the construction of the Forbidden City to the voyages of the legendary Admiral Zheng He. These milestones serve as both inspiration and pressure, a reminder that the world is in constant flux and that you must adapt or risk falling behind. But let's be honest, sometimes the weight of history feels like a particularly stubborn ink stain that refuses to budge. So, how do you navigate a rapidly changing world while staying true to the values that define you? It's a question that has no easy answers, a riddle that scholars have wrestled with for centuries. As you ponder these thoughts, the moonlight spilling through your window casts an ethereal glow on your desk, illuminating the delicate brushstrokes of a calligraphy scroll. It's a reminder that while the world outside may be chaotic, there's still beauty to be found in the simple act of creation. Whether it's a poem, a painting, or a well-crafted essay, these small acts of artistry serve as both a refuge and a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. And speaking of the human spirit, let's fast forward a few centuries. Today's world is a far cry from the Ming Dynasty, with its digital wonders and relentless pace of information. But in many ways, the challenges faced by modern scholars aren't so different from those of their Ming counterparts. Sure, we have the internet, but with it comes the paradox of choice, an endless sea of data that threatens to drown us in its depths. In this age of information overload, the value of historical scholarship takes on new significance. The past offers lessons that are both timeless and timely, a compass to guide us through the complexities of the present. It's a reminder that while technology may change, the fundamental questions of humanity remain the same. How do we live well? How do we understand each other? How do we leave the world a better place than we found it? So, as you close your eyes and drift into the realm of dreams, consider this. Being a scholar isn't just about acquiring knowledge. It's about weaving that knowledge into the fabric of life, creating a tapestry that is as vibrant as it is meaningful. Whether you lived in the 14th century or the 21st, the pursuit of wisdom is a journey without end, one that invites us to explore, to question, and ultimately to connect with the world around us. And with that, dear scholar, you slip into the gentle embrace of sleep, carried by the echoes of history and the promise of new discoveries awaiting you with the dawn. As the city of Nanjing slumbers beneath a blanket of stars, the legacy of the Ming Dynasty continues to unfold, a testament to the enduring power of the human mind and the timeless pursuit of enlightenment. In the medieval era, inns were the equivalent of today's truck stops, necessary, functional, and occasionally questionable establishments that guarded the perilous trade routes of Europe. Forget the charming images of cozy firesides and smiling innkeepers. Medieval inns were more like the Wild West saloons of their day, minus the swinging saloon doors, but with just as much unpredictability. You're more likely to find a rowdy bunch of travellers grumbling over their watered-down ale than a merry band of minstrels strumming lutes by the hearth. Inns sprouted up like mushrooms after a rainstorm along the major trade arteries. Picture your quintessential medieval road trip, minus the Instagrammable pit stops. Merchants, pilgrims, and even the odd knight in rusty armor needed places to rest their weary heads, and maybe their horses too. Inns became economic linchpins, the medieval answer to airbooms, except with more straw and less cleanliness. By the 12th century, they were sprinkled across Europe like breadcrumbs on a baker's floor, serving as crucial nodes in the network of trade and travel. The clientele of these establishments was as varied as it was volatile. You'd rub elbows with merchants schlepping their wares from market to market, pilgrims on their way to score heavenly brownie points, and perhaps a few wayward nobility dodging political intrigue. But let's not forget the less savory types, thieves, vagabonds, and the occasional fugitive on the lam. After all, inns were perfect for blending in with the crowd, especially if you were trying to avoid a certain sheriff or inquisitor. Now, about those romantic notions of medieval inns being welcoming havens, it's time to pop that bubble with a sharp needle of reality. Inns were no Eden. They were more like necessary evils. Sure, the idea of a warm meal and a roof over one's head sounds delightful after a long day on the road. But in reality, the food was often as dubious as the company. Innkeepers were notorious for stretching their stock. Think watered-down ale and bread harder than a knight's shield. And the beds, let's just say you'd be lucky to find one that didn't come with its own ecosystem of bedbugs. Here's the kicker. Medieval authorities were well aware of the shenanigans that could unfold within the walls of these inns. They weren't keen on letting them devolve into medieval party zones. Local regulations often imposed strict guidelines to keep the chaos in check. In London, for instance, a 15th century ordinance required innkeepers to swear an oath to keep peace and order, a promise as fragile as a glass window in a hailstorm. The rules were there to prevent inns from becoming too rowdy, too bawdy, or too much of a nuisance to the neighbours. Authorities were particularly wary of inns becoming havens for gambling, debauchery, or plotting against the crown, a pastime as popular then as scrolling TikTok is today. Speaking of regulations, inns were subject to a surprising amount of bureaucratic oversight, a medieval precursor to modern health and safety inspections. In some regions, innkeepers were required to maintain a guest register, a medieval guest book of sorts, where they documented the comings and goings of their patrons. This was partly to keep tabs on any unsavory characters passing through, and partly to ensure the innkeeper wasn't skimming off the top of local taxes. Inns were also expected to adhere to price controls, ensuring they didn't gouge customers too hard for a night's rest or a mug of ale. Though, as you can imagine, enforcement of these rules was about as consistent as the medieval weather. Inns' economic significance can't be overstated. They were the lifeblood of trade routes, offering shelter and sustenance to those who kept the wheels of commerce turning. They were the medieval equivalent of rest stops on the Silk Road, fueling the trade engine that powered much of Europe's economy. Without inns, merchants and their goods would have been stalled, leaving markets understocked and economies stagnant. They were crucial in connecting bustling cities like Paris and London with emerging trade hubs like Bruges and Cologne, facilitating the flow of goods, culture, and for better or worse gossip. But let's not kid ourselves about the cleanliness and comfort of these places. Sanitation was not exactly a selling point. The average inn was more likely to smell like a stable than a spa, and the accommodations were just as rustic. A simple room might cost you a few pennies a night, more if you wanted a bit of privacy. But privacy was often a luxury for the affluent. Most travelers shared communal sleeping arrangements, with beds lined up like sardines in a can. A thin curtain was all that separated you from your snoring neighbor, and if you were lucky, the noise of the inn's common room wouldn't keep you awake until the rooster crowed. So, while we might romanticize the medieval inn as a quaint, charming refuge from the rigors of the road, the reality was far less idyllic. Inns were crucial cogs in the machine of medieval travel and commerce, but they were also rough, rowdy, and regulated hubs of humanity. They served their purpose, albeit with a side of unpredictability and the occasional bedbug. As we delve further into the daily life within these establishments, it's clear they were far more than just a place to rest one's weary head. They were a microcosm of medieval society, warts and all. While inns were the bustling hubs of medieval travel, their inner workings were a bit like a medieval soap opera with a dash of chaos theory. The kitchen, the beating heart of any inn, was a symphony of clattering pots, sizzling meats, and the occasional yelp from a harried cook trying to dodge both flames and flying insults. Forget the Michelin stars. This was more like a culinary battlefield, where the goal was to churn out food that was edible, if not exactly palatable. If you imagined a gourmet feast, you'd be sorely disappointed, unless lukewarm stew and rock-hard bread are your idea of fine dining. The kitchen staff, a motley crew of cooks, scullions, and maybe a kitchen boy if the inn was particularly upscale, worked in conditions that would make a modern health inspector faint. The smoke-filled room was often a sweltering inferno, with ventilation practically an afterthought. Cooking was done over open fires, which were as likely to char the food as your eyebrows if you weren't careful. And let's not even talk about the hygiene. Washing hands was as foreign a concept as Wi-Fi. The menu might include a pottage, a thick stew that was a catch-all for whatever ingredients were on hand, or perhaps a roast, if the innkeeper wanted to impress the guests, or simply clear out some old inventory. Moving from the kitchen to the common room, the atmosphere shifted from culinary chaos to social circus. This was where the real action happened. The common room was a cacophony of voices, laughter, and the occasional brawl. Imagine a medieval bar without the bouncers. Here, travelers from all walks of life gathered to swap stories, gossip, and possibly a few punches. Drinking was a communal activity, and while the ale was watered down, it was still strong enough to lubricate conversation and occasionally fuel disputes. The innkeeper played the role of ringmaster in this lively circus. Contrary to the image of a burly, bearded man slinging ale, innkeepers were often women, especially in England and France. They wielded significant power within these establishments, their authority rivaling that of local officials. Running an inn was no small feat. It required a sharp mind, a shrewd sense of business, and the patience of a saint. The innkeeper was responsible for everything from managing staff to negotiating with suppliers and ensuring the local sheriff didn't make too many surprise visits. Women in this role defied the traditional gender norms of the time, demonstrating that necessity could flip societal expectations on their head like a pancake on a griddle. The staff hierarchy was as fluid as the ale. In larger inns, you might find a hostler, responsible for the care of guests' horses, a crucial role in an age when your steed was your primary mode of transportation. A chamberlain would oversee the rooms, ensuring they were at least passable for human habitation. And let's not forget the serving wenches, who had to deftly navigate the crowded common room, balancing trays of food while dodging the occasional wandering hand. Working at an inn was not for the faint of heart, but it was a job that offered a glimpse into a world of commerce, travel, and intrigue. Speaking of intrigue, the cost of lodging added another layer to this medieval tapestry. Prices varied wildly based on location, demand, and the innkeeper's mood. A night in a shared room could set you back a couple of pennies, while a private room might cost a few more. For context, a skilled craftsman could earn around 2 to 3 pennies a day, so a night at the inn was a significant expense. And what did you get for your hard-earned coins? A lumpy straw mattress, a questionable meal, and the privilege of sharing your space with strangers who might snore louder than a medieval bagpipe. Now, if you're imagining room service as we know it today, let's set the record straight. Medieval room service was more like a medieval scavenger hunt. Want a meal in your room? You'd better be prepared to fetch it yourself, or slip a few extra coins to a serving wench willing to brave the stairs. The concept of personal service was as foreign as a fork. Most people ate with their fingers or a knife. If you wanted something done, you'd often need to do it yourself, unless you had the coin and clout to command service. Inns were more than just pit stops for weary travelers. They were microcosms of medieval life, revealing the era's social dynamics, economic realities, and the occasional surprise. They were places where gender roles could blur, where the social hierarchy was both rigid and fluid, and where the line between guest and host could sometimes be as thin as the ale served. Delving further into their operations offers a window into a world as complex as it was captivating. As we continue our journey through the daily life inside these establishments, it's clear that inns were the stage upon which a myriad of medieval dramas unfolded. And speaking of medieval dramas, nothing stirred the pot quite like the food and drink culture inside these inns. Let's dive into the culinary scene, where the ale versus wine debate raged fiercer than a jousting tournament on market day. You see, ale was the liquid bread of the medieval diet, a staple as ubiquitous as tick-tock dances today. It was the medieval multitasker, providing hydration, nutrition, and inebriation, all in one frothy mug. But ale was more than just a thirst quencher. It was the social glue that held the inn's ragtag tapestry of pilgrims, merchants, and misfits together. Now, don't get too romantic about this thick, yeasty concoction. Forget the craft beer aesthetic with artisanal hops. Medieval ale was a whole different beast. It was unfiltered and cloudy, often as chunky as a misjudged stew, and served at room temperature, you betcha. But before you turn up your modern nose, consider this. In an age when water could be as deadly as a knight's lance, ale was the safer option. Fermentation helped kill off those pesky pathogens. Plus, it was packed with enough calories to keep the medieval farmer ploughing fields and the inn brawler swinging fists. But what about wine? Ah, the drink of the elite, or so the story goes. Wine was as much a status symbol as a well-bred horse or an unblemished reputation. The truth is, wine was a bit like medieval Wi-Fi, available but not always reliable, and certainly not for everyone. While southern Europe, with its sun-drenched vineyards, guzzled the stuff like it was going out of style, in the cooler, rain-drenched north, wine was more of a luxury than a staple. Importing wine was costly, and local production was often limited to monasteries and the occasional noble estate. The great ale versus wine debate wasn't just about taste. It was an economic and social battleground. In England, where the climate was better suited to barley than grapes, ale reigned supreme. Taverns and inns served it by the gallon, much to the delight of thirsty travelers. In contrast, wine was the drink of choice in France and Italy, where locals savored their regional vintages and scoffed at the idea of drinking what they considered a peasant's brew. This wasn't just a matter of preference. It was a reflection of trade routes, agricultural practices, and good old-fashioned snobbery. Let's turn our attention to the menu, if we can call it that. Inns didn't hand you a laminated list of options. You ate what was cooking, and that was usually whatever the innkeeper's kitchen could cobble together. Historical records suggest that meals at inns were a potluck of possibilities. Pottage, a thick stew of grains and vegetables, was a staple. Think of it as the medieval answer to ramen noodles, cheap and filling. If you were lucky, there might be some meat in the pot, usually whatever was cheapest or about to go bad. Salted pork, fish, and the occasional fowl were common if the innkeeper was feeling generous or trying to impress. Bread was another fixture, though don't expect anything resembling a fluffy ciabatta. Medieval bread was dense, heavy, and probably could have doubled as a weapon in a pinch. It was often made with a mix of grains, sometimes even peas or beans when times were tough. The crust was thick enough to withstand a siege, and the inside was often more crumbly than chewy. But bread was essential, a source of sustenance that complemented the ale and filled bellies on a budget. Now, let's address the elephant, or should I say, the brawler in the room. Inns were notorious for their rowdy atmospheres, and nothing fueled a good old-fashioned medieval brawl quite like too much liquid bread. Imagine a common room filled with travelers, each with their own agenda, attitude, and bedtime stories. Add a few pints of ale to the mix, and you had a recipe for chaos more explosive than a dragon in a dungeon. Historical accounts are peppered with tales of inn brawls, where disputes over debts, dice games, or even seating arrangements escalated into full-blown melees. Take, for instance, the infamous brawl at the Blue Boar Inn in London, circa 1389, where a squabble over a game of chance ended with several patrons taking a dip in the Thames, presumably to cool off their tempers. Or the legendary fracas at the Red Lion Tavern in 1453, where chairs, tankards, and probably a few choice words flew with equal abandon. These weren't just drunken scuffles. They were microcosms of the tensions and rivalries that simmered beneath the surface of medieval society. Of course, not every inn was a battleground, and many travelers managed to enjoy their ale and stew in relative peace. But the potential for pandemonium was ever present, a reminder that medieval inns were as unpredictable as a court jester on a sugar high. They were places where the lines between social classes blurred, where a merchant might share a drink with a knight, or a pilgrim might swap stories with a wandering minstrel. And as long as there was ale to be drunk and tales to be told, inns would remain vibrant, volatile hubs of medieval life. So, what lessons can we draw from this boisterous, ale-soaked culture? For one, medieval inns were more than mere stopping points on a journey. They were arenas for social interaction, economic exchange, and occasionally physical expression. The food and drink served weren't merely sustenance. They were symbols of the broader cultural and economic landscape. Ale and wine weren't just beverages. They were emblems of regional identity, social status, and the age-old human penchant for a good debate over a drink. As we continue our exploration of life inside these medieval way stations, let's keep in mind that the stories they tell are as complex and multifaceted as the people who pass through their doors. From the clattering kitchen to the boisterous common room, inns were places where history happened, one mug of ale at a time. And who knows, perhaps the next time you raise a glass, you'll toast not just to the drink in your hand, but to the rich, riotous tapestry of humanity it represents. Stay with us as we journey deeper into the world of medieval inns, where every corner holds another tale waiting to be told. And speaking of stories, inns were the medieval equivalent of today's Twitter feeds, if Twitter came with the risk of lice and the occasional brawl. These places were more than just pit stops for weary travelers. They were buzzing hubs of information where merchants, pilgrims, and wayward knights swapped news faster than a town crier on market day. Need to catch up on royal scandals, political upheavals, or the latest crusade mishap? Look no further than the common room of your local inn, where the ale flowed as freely as the gossip. Now, hold your horses before you start romanticizing these inns as quaint centers of community interaction. Sure, they had the charm of a medieval Facebook group, but they also carried the same risks. Much like today's social media platforms, inns were rife with misinformation. Travelers would often embellish stories to impress, or outright fabricate tales to entertain. A knight would claim he single-handedly defeated a dozen foes, while in reality he might have just tripped on his own sword. The medieval traveler had to be as discerning as a modern fact-checker, sifting through tales of dragon sightings and miraculous pilgrimages to find kernels of truth. Inns also served as unofficial news agencies, particularly in an age when literacy was about as common as unicorn sightings. For many, the inn was the only place to hear about events beyond their village, from royal decrees to distant wars. An innkeeper with a keen ear could gather enough intel to rival a modern news desk. This informal information network made inns indispensable to medieval society. They were the medieval equivalent of a Wi-Fi hotspot, albeit one where the signal was as shaky as a medieval bridge in a storm. But here's the twist. Inns weren't just innocent bystanders in the flow of information. They played an active role in shaping it. Some innkeepers doubled as spies, gathering intelligence for local lords or even foreign powers. In a world where letters could be intercepted and messages took weeks to travel, the spoken word was both powerful and perilous. An innkeeper with a loose tongue could sway public opinion, spark rebellion, or even change the course of history with a well-placed rumor. This brings us to the darker side of inns, their role as clandestine meeting spots for rebels and conspirators. If walls could talk, the stories they'd tell would make Game of Thrones look like a child's bedtime story. Inns were the perfect places for plotting, offering both anonymity and a steady flow of information. Rebels planning to overthrow a tyrant, spies exchanging secrets, and traders looking to sell out their lords, all found inns to be ideal venues for their shady dealings. Take the infamous gunpowder plot of 1605, for instance. While the conspirators' final act of treason was set to occur in London, much of the planning happened in the back rooms of various inns across England. Inns offered the privacy of a hidden alcove, coupled with the bustling distractions of the common room, perfect for masking secretive conversations. The authorities knew this, which is why they kept a close eye on innkeepers, who were often required to report any suspicious activity. Of course, whether they did or not was a matter of personal allegiance and the weight of a coin purse. Kings and landlords were understandably wary of these hotbeds of rebellion. They imposed strict regulations, requiring innkeepers to monitor the comings and goings of their guests. In some cases, spies were planted among the staff to gather intelligence and report back any signs of dissent. The penalty for harboring traitors was severe, often resulting in fines, imprisonment, or worse. Yet, despite the risks, many innkeepers played a dangerous game, weighing loyalty against profit and survival. Inns, therefore, were more than just waypoints on a journey. They were microcosms of medieval society, where the mundane met the clandestine and the ordinary mingled with the extraordinary. They were places where power was negotiated, alliances were formed, and history was quietly and sometimes explosively made. As we continue to peel back the layers of these fascinating establishments, we find that inns were not just passive observers of history. They were active participants, shaping the world one whispered conversation at a time. So, the next time you step into a cozy pub or bustling cafe, think of the medieval inn and its role as the social media of its day. Imagine the stories that have unfolded there, the secrets whispered over mugs of ale, and the plans hatched in dimly lit corners. Remember that history isn't just made in palaces and battlefields. It's crafted in the everyday places where people meet, talk, and dream of a different world. And as we journey further into the heart of these medieval way stations, let us keep our ears open for the tales that still echo through the ages, waiting to be told. And so, with one foot in the romanticized past and another firmly in the muck of reality, we arrive at the crux of our medieval in exploration. Let's strip away the rose-tinted glasses and look at these establishments for what they truly were. Microcosms of medieval society, with all its quirks, chaos, and questionable culinary decisions. You see, the fairy tale notion of inns as quaint, cozy hideaways is as misleading as a medieval map. In reality, they were bustling hubs where the dirt on the floor was as thick as the gossip in the air. First, let's tackle the myth of the idyllic inn. The image of a warm hearth and welcoming innkeeper is appealing, sure, but it's about as accurate as calling a jousting tournament a casual sporting event. Historical accounts paint a different picture, one of grimy floors, dubious food, and the ever-present aroma of unwashed travellers. Take the 14th century complaints from travellers in England who likened inn fare to boiled boots, and remarked that the straw mattresses were more akin to lumpy gravel beds. Not exactly the stuff of dreams, unless your dream involves waking up to a chorus of snoring strangers and a backache. While we're on the subject of food, medieval inns were not the culinary haven some might hope. In an era where refrigeration was as mythical as dragons, preserving food was a dicey endeavor. This meant that your stew might have been brewing for days, with each new batch merely a refresh of whatever was left in the pot. It's the medieval equivalent of ordering a surprise dish, with the surprise often being its questionable freshness. And let's not forget the ale, served at a temperature that could best be described as room temp with a side of sediment. Now, onto the social dynamics of these establishments. As microcosms of medieval society, inns were where the rigid class structures of the day could momentarily blur. Imagine a knight, a merchant, and a pilgrim all vying for the same spot near the fire, sharing tales that were as tall as the innkeeper's tab. This mingling of classes was both the charm and the chaos of the medieval inexperience. Yet, despite the hodgepodge of humanity, societal norms still peeked through. The knight might have the best seat, but the merchant was likely the one footing the bill. Economically, inns were indispensable to the medieval travel network, much like how you can't imagine a road trip today without a pit stop for overpriced snacks. They were the Wi-Fi hotspots of their time, facilitating trade and travel by providing a, mostly, reliable place for rest and refreshment. This was crucial in an age when journeys took weeks or months, and the dangers on the road were as unpredictable as the medieval weather. Inns, with all their flaws, were the glue that held the fragile framework of commerce and communication together. But let's not forget the darker side of these establishments. The clandestine meetings, the whispered conspiracies. Inns were perfect breeding grounds for treachery. The gunpowder plot wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a long tradition of inns serving as the backdrop for political intrigue. In a world where information was power, an innkeeper with a sharp ear was invaluable. They were the original influencers, wielding their knowledge like a sword, ready to cut through the noise or ignite a rebellion. In dissecting the reality of medieval inns, one might wonder how they laid the groundwork for modern hospitality. Well, consider the evolution of the industry. The principles of providing shelter, food, and questionable service remain the same, though the execution has, thankfully, improved. Today's hotels have traded straw mattresses for memory foam and dubious stews for room service menus. But the essence of the inn, being a nexus of human interaction, a place where stories unfold and connections are made, remains unchanged. Inns were the glue of medieval society, sticky with the residue of their patrons' lives. They were imperfect, gritty, and sometimes downright unpleasant, yet they were indispensable. They remind us that history isn't just about grand palaces or epic battles. It's in the everyday places where people come together, share a meal, and perhaps plot a revolution. So, next time you check into a hotel, raise a glass to the medieval inns, the original venues of hospitality, humanity, and the occasional historic twist.